Brings you the news across all codes and takes a deep dive into sporting history, plus interviews with legends of our dominant codes.
Join us for Spotlight as we bring you key moments you may have missed, exclusive interviews, stories and major headlines. Spotlight brings you new insight into the major stories throughout the week and brings you up to speed with the current affairs.
Your 24/7 source for unbiased news coverage with our dedicated team, bringing you more variety, more content and more updates around the clock. Tune in and stay ahead with 6 News, your go-to destination for news that matters. Live on 6 News, this is Britain Decides, General Election 2024.
And a very good morning to you. It's just gone 7 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time and it's hit 10 p.m. in the UK, where polls have now closed. We are about to see the exit poll released for the 2024 UK general election. It is going to be a huge morning and day for us here in Australia. We will be covering all of this for you. We'll expect actual results to come in next hour, so we're filling a bit of time until then, but it is going to be a massive morning for you. We've got our full team here bringing you the latest coverage. We've even sent a man to Europe for it. Stuart, Jeffrey and Maggie, Perry and Maggie. We're going to get to you first. I'm going to fill time allowing you to find the result. But the exit poll, right? That is a much bigger thing in the UK. They put much more attention on it than any of our exit polls. The results should have come in just about now. Do we have them?
Yes, we do. Currently, it looks like Labor is, as expected, in the lead with 410 seats. That would be up 209, but it's still much lower than maybe the supermajority. A lot of people expected up to 500, 550 seats. The Conservatives are at 131 seats, which is down 2/3 of what they had last Parliament. That's 240 seats they've lost. The Lib Dems are going to end up on 61, according to the exit poll. Reform UK on 13. The Scottish National Party on a absolutely dismal 10, which is down 38. Plaid Cymru, Welsh Independence Party at 4, and the Greens on 2, which is up 1.
You said Reform 13?
Yes.
That's massive. That is, I was thinking 2. 13 is, that's bigger than the SNP according to this. That is massive. What do you make of that? Because, I mean, everyone's saying it was if Nigel Farage gets into the race, this will happen. And I'm safe to assume if 13 Reform candidates are elected, he will be one of them.
Yes, it looks like his constituency of Clacton would likely be one of those seats included. I can't imagine it wouldn't. I presume that Richard Tice, former Reform UK leader, and Lee Anderson, who is the incumbent Reform UK MP in the Parliament, would also be elected. I think this would be a pretty good result for Reform UK. I presume that they'd get a percentage point of around 20%, which is huge, maybe even bigger than the Conservatives.
And how many Greens were there again?
Just 2.
Just 2, right. And they've got 1 at the moment.
Yeah. They've been aiming for Bristol Central, which is an area that is very strongly held by Labor. If they gained that, it might be the only Labor loss in this entire general election. They've also been aiming for Conservative seats in rural areas like Waveney Valley and North Herefordshire.
Right, yeah. So I'm just kind of crunching the numbers at the same time here. Obviously, that's still a huge majority there for Labor. Lib Dems, obviously, they're not in official opposition, much to, I'm sure, the disappointment of many, given Sir Ed Davies' antics. But I mean, that is still huge. Look, we're going to continue our coverage of the exit poll in a moment. Of course, there's a lot else going on at the moment. And for that, as we do on the hour, every hour, we're going to get to the very latest headlines for you. Here's Darby Travers.
Top 2, check it out. Moscow Circus is currently in Melbourne. Roll up, the circus is coming. Leo, thank you. We will return to our UK election coverage in a moment, but to the other stories making news this hour, and Western Australian Senator Fatima Payman has announced she has left the Labor Party. In a statement to the media, Payman said she was torn about the decision but had been pressured to conform to caucus solidarity and follow the party line. She also said she had experienced intimidation while also denying that she would form a new Muslim-focused party, instead now sitting as an independent. The move does come just days after she was suspended indefinitely from the party's caucus after she crossed the Senate floor to support a Greens urgency motion calling for recognition of a Palestinian state. Payman will now be sitting on the crossbench, reducing the government's numbers in the upper house to 25. Just days ago, she told Six News that she had hoped to remain in Labor and still had the party's values. Pressure continues to mount on Joe Biden to drop out of the US presidential race following his debate performance against Donald Trump. Over the weekend, his family members have urged him to stay in the race and not stand aside, but some Democrats are now saying he is set to lose in November. 6 News North American correspondent Wyatt Sharp with more.
There are several things that need to happen. Number one, senior Democrats need to call on Joe Biden to step down. Number two, his family needs to talk to him. And number three, fundraisers and those who actually fund the Democratic Party need to kind of express a sense of kind of disillusionment of what's happening with President Biden. They need to express a sense that they do not feel confident in the president. So if we look at those three things, we say, okay, what are the people who are in elected positions of power actually saying? Well, we had Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, say recently that she believes President Biden will not be able to win the state of Michigan. She said that privately, of course. She's not going to come out and publicly acknowledge that. But according to Politico, she said in a room of senior Democrats in the state of Michigan that she believes President Biden will not be able to win that state. That could be due to a number of different reasons. Of course, among them, likely the fact that there is some Democratic fracturing right now over the issue of the war in Israel and Gaza. We've seen polling data that suggests that that Democratic fracturing could actually play an impact in Michigan. But that's not really all. I mean, I spoke to Gavin Newsom when I was in Atlanta at the debate, in the debate spin room, and he acknowledged and he said that he does not think the Democrats realistically could go with anybody else. And he also said that he believes that President Biden should be the nominee.
Changing pace now, and roll up, the circus has come to town in Victoria for the school holidays. The Great Moscow Circus is currently in Melbourne before then moving on to regional Victoria. And 6 News reporter Lincoln Holmes hit the mighty big top to check it out.
It's school holidays here in Victoria, and for the parents looking for things to do to entertain the kids, I've got one idea. How about the circus? After all, the Great Moscow Circus is in town, and based at JL Murphy Reserve in Port Melbourne, the crowds are already pouring into the tent. For BMX rider Nathan Freeman, the more the fans, the better the atmosphere, and the better the performance.
The more they go crazy, the more we ride hard and put on a show, I guess you'd say.
This year's season has already taken the team all over. From Tasmania, where they started this year, to Geelong, to Mildura, to Bendigo, to Melton, and now to Melbourne. For singer Ali Rowbotham, her path was one full of training, scouring Facebook groups for opportunities before one day coming across the Great Moscow Circus.
I've trained my whole life in dance and singing and acting, And then I joined Facebook pages for auditions. I saw the Great Moscow Circus was looking for a vocalist, so I submitted, and here we are.
And she's never looked back.
Yes, I've grown up training, getting to work with them and live with them. It's just great. You feel like you belong somewhere and everyone's on the same page.
It was a different joining path for Nathan Freeman, who just so happened to get his opportunity to join the circus following a BMX competition.
It was about 2 years ago that I was at a contest in New Zealand and had someone from the circus contact me saying they needed a rider for the circus to come over to Perth. It was literally like one day after I got contacted, I flew out to the other side of Australia to start working with the circus, and I've never looked back since.
Well, for performer Talia Webber, the circus is in her blood.
I'm actually a 7th generation circus performer, and I've been in the circus my whole life. I've been doing trapeze since I was 12, and I've just recently started doing the pole.
She described to 6 News how it felt for the circus to return post its 2-year COVID hiatus.
During COVID, we had to stop for 2 years. We just lived in our house on the Gold Coast, just did normal life for 2 years, and I was like so excited to get back on the road and perform. It barely feels like work when you're doing what you love.
For Nathan, he described the feeling of being on the stage in the middle of that big tent.
For me, I'm used to it because I go to big competitions and it's just maybe like 15 times how many people are here. So it's like pretty easy for me out there, but I love it.
Scooter riding superstar Reece Rogers, who is Australia's #1, put his skills on show, accomplishing a double whip. Worldwide superstars duo Acero keep the audience thrilled with their breathtaking pole performance captivating the fans. Whether it's the ropes, the BMX and scooter riders, the jumping, or the singing, the Great Moscow Circus certainly has something for everybody. After leaving Port Melbourne on the 14th of July, the next location is in Wangaratta, with their first show on the 18th of July. Following their wrap-up in Wangaratta on the 28th of July, it's then on to Benalla for 4 days only. But there's one last message from the team to those thinking of attending.
Everyone should come down. It's a good place for the family to come watch and bring your kids so they can see us riding the ramps, and it's like a good influence for them to go out to the skate park and just have a good time.
Definitely come down. We haven't been here for 7 years and our show really is amazing from start to finish.
For sure, come along. It is amazing, acts you've never seen before and you wouldn't expect to see under the tent.
Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
Alright, and those are the latest headlines we are following. You can stay up to date by heading to our website or by following us on social media at SIXNewsAU. I'm Darby Travers. Let's now return to our live coverage of the UK general election.
You're watching Britain Decides General Election 2024.
You're back with us live here on 6 News as we continue our coverage of the UK election. And again, I want to repeat the results of that exit poll. Of course, exit polls are a bigger thing, right, in the UK than they are here. Labor, 410. Conservatives, 131. Liberal Democrats, 61. Reform, 13. SNP, 10. Greens, 2. 23 others. We'll bring back in Stuart Jeffrey, GovCheck editor, and Maggie Perry, election reporter. Maggie, again, what are we seeing in terms of some of these other results here? Jeremy Corbyn's been an interesting race to watch. I'm sure we've both been following it. Former Labor leader at the last election, right, running as an independent, running in a what was technically notionally Labor. Do we know what's happening to him?
Well, with the other seat count, 18 of those are seats in Northern Ireland. 1 is the Speaker, and I believe 4 is for Plaid Cymru, which means Jeremy Corbyn would not be re-elected in his seat of Arlington North. Neither would George Galloway in Rochdale and a handful of other pro-Palestine independents.
Right, yeah. So George Galloway, of course, he won that by-election a couple months ago. Workers' Party of Great Britain, follows me on Twitter. Why did I mention that? So there we go. We'll bring in Stuart now. Stuart, morning to you. So What do you make of these results in terms of what they're seeing here? I mean, it's undoubtedly, you know, a huge result for Labor, and really big for reform as well.
I mean, 13 was generous comparing to their polling, although that suggests a UKIP polling of around 20%. I believe on polling figures, they were third ahead of the Lib Dems, who are the third biggest party officially in Parliament. Reminder there that it's not the same as Australia's Lib Dems, now Libertarian Party, going from the UK name to a US name, political party-wise. But definitely seeing that is quite big. I want to focus on the UKIP pollings, or UKIP turned Brexit Party turned Reform. With those 13 seats, even if they don't win all 13, which they might not, wouldn't be surprised if they don't, because first past the post is a thing in the UK. But the thing I think it's important to remember is with the Greens versus Reform, is that Reform's had a lot more success in reforming the Conservatives than the Greens have for Labour. The Reform Party pulling the Conservatives more right, but the Greens have not been able to pull the Labour to the left in terms of, you know, attracting votes. With winning only 2 seats, that makes it even worse for Greens. A lot of people were predicting about 3 seats. So obviously, they've lost one. I'm not sure whether it's Waverley Valley, because that's, of course, is the new seat up for grabs by anyone now incumbent. So losing one of those expected seats is definitely a setback for the Greens, who already have less influence on Labour than the Reform Party has on the Conservatives.
Yeah. Good morning to everyone watching at home. Of course, we'd love your comments in the live chat. Give them to us. I'm told that my mic's too low, and I think I can probably turn that up. Don't blame me. We broke a mic. If I'm not hearing otherwise from Stuart, from Roman, I think that should be louder. So give me a break, guys. I got up too early for this. Reform, right? I think it's interesting in terms of, Stuart, where they were going to end up, because I was seeing polls from like as little as 0 to as high as I think 18. 13's roughly in the middle. Don't get me started on maths. But I mean, considering a couple months ago, pre-Farage, they were not tracking well at all. I mean, they were, you know, single digits. They were low single digits, I think, at points. Goes to show how big of a campaigner he is, and how, for the base, he's great at getting seats.
Well, of course, his recent campaign has had a fair few setbacks, I want to say. We had, I think, one candidate resigned from the party. You've, of course, had the controversies surrounding him discussing Andrew Tate in the past, and I mean, that's pretty standard for Farage having issues from his previous takes. I don't expect them to win all 13. I think that's generous. I think they were polling to win about 11 beforehand. I could be wrong on this data, depending on who you ask. Definitely, they were expected to guarantee 2 or 3. Of course, Farage and also Richard Tice getting in. He's the deputy chair. Oh, he's the chairman, and then you've got Ashfield as well, with the defector Tory MP, who was expected maybe to be a bit iffy in his seat. But if these figures are correct, then he will likely also retain his seat in Ashfield. That gives them at least 3. And again, polling at other seats as well. I think the UK, very much as technical voting is very much a thing in the UK, where people vote for the party that they think will win. Everyone agrees that the Tories will lose. Therefore, people who would normally vote for the Tories for strategic reasons never feel that they can vote for Reform Party freely, and that's going to affect polling definitely.
I just saw on Twitter from Irish Patriot on Twitter. Why am I reading out election Twitter accounts? But he says that and I trust the numbers. This exit poll is saying Starmer would get less seats than Tony Blair did in 97, despite what every pundit and predictor said. If it's correct, UK election predictors are going to get a kicking. If it's wrong, it will be a seismic wrongdoing we haven't seen in decades. And I think that might be true. I would not be surprised if Labor goes up from here, really. I see no reason why they possibly couldn't. But again, exit polls, some are good, some aren't, eh?
I will say that exit poll is really bad for the SNP, but it's not overly surprising. Generally, when Labor does well in polling and elections, the SNP performs poorly. It's been a three-party race at a local level in Scotland between SNP, Labor, and the Conservatives. Of course, SNP has more than a majority right now in the Scottish Parliament. And for them to be polling badly here means that Labour is performing well in Scotland. And if that's the case, we might see the Labour power base even shift slightly northwards as well, which could then affect the next Scottish elections. But definitely those polling figures in Scotland indicate that we'll have a strong Labour presence in those seats.
Absolutely. Look, we'll bring back in Maggie Perry now. Maggie, of course, we're noting that the UK has first past the post here. How much of a factor do you how much of a factor do you think that is in terms of, I guess, tactical voting, especially this election, when the message is everywhere to just kick the Tories out, right? And most seats, that's Labor or Lib Dems, or most Labor, but a lot Lib Dems as well. Although, I mean, Reform would be beating Tories in some seats. I mean, Nigel Farage is beating a Conservative.
Well, I mean, with preferential voting, you'd see these votes from parties like the Liberal Democrats or the Greens in areas where they don't have a strong vote go towards Labor, and we'd probably see a much lower Conservative vote. And as a result, a much lower Conservative seat count, probably something in the 50s, honestly. But I think first past the post has honestly helped the Conservatives here, especially with defeating their big right-wing rival, Reform UK, who has been polling around the same as the Conservatives, 18%, 17%. And yet, this exit poll, it seems that they'll get just 10% of what the Conservatives are going to get.
Yeah, and that'll be really interesting. Of course, the vote percentages could be interesting, right? Whether, the Conservatives pull in second, but get less seats, or how does Reform go? Because Reform has been up there with the Conservatives, right? How many polls have we seen in recent times that have had Labor above the Conservatives, right? Oh, sorry, Labor is like, 20 points higher than Reform, right? And that's ridiculous a couple months ago. That never kind of thing happens here, but evidently it's happening there, which would be a disaster for them. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if this is overestimating the Tories and underestimating Labor.
Yeah, I mean, these exit polls, we've seen regional breakdowns. Labor would even go down in London. They'd go down in Wales. I'm not sure if I can quite believe that. They've only seen very moderate uprises in their vote share in the rest of the country, but a whopping 18% higher vote share in Scotland, which obviously goes to show the devastating loss the SNP is having.
Well, what's been happening with the SNP, right? We've seen they've had drama recently. The changing of the first ministers, which was a mess. Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, she was decently well known. She was leading when it was the independence referendums and all that, and then they seem to have collapsed. A lot of that seems to be down to the Scottish politics, not something that's happening in Westminster. Well, what exactly has been happening here?
Well, they had this abysmal First Minister situation where I think they've gone through three leaders in the past few months. Nicola Sturgeon, Hamza Yousaf. I don't even know who the First Minister is anymore for Scotland, who the leader.
Something like that.
Yeah. But I mean, we've seen polling the SNP just barely below Labor.
John Swinney,
some have them
that's it.
higher. Yeah. But I think the real big killer is tactical voting, even though in, of course, the rest of England and Wales, often people tactical vote against the Conservatives. In Scotland, there's a very huge amount of tactical voting against the SNP. I think at the regional elections 3 years ago, 70% of people said their vote was tactical. I think, this SNP loss is way worse than any previous polls have shown.
Yeah, I didn't think that'd be under reform, and it's interesting, right? Because I saw that I saw one Twitter comment, right, and you just mentioned tactical voting. It's like it was from someone who's a traditionally conservative voter who described themselves as conservative, and they said I voted Labor to get rid of the SNP, right? Which goes to show them. Look, let's get into some of our general predictions, and we'll bring Stuart back in now as well. Prior to this exit poll, and again, I've already said that, I think Labor should have realistically probably more seats than this, and the Tories less. Maggie, we'll just stick with you. What is your prediction been going into this in terms of just how high things go for Labor?
I think we were probably going to end up with a bit of a lesser result than maybe some people expected for Labor, 500 seats, but still obviously a overwhelming Labor majority. The Conservatives probably I predicted would end up around 100, and the Liberal Democrats around 60, which seems to be the case right now.
You'd be spot on with that Lib Dems prediction, 61 they've got in that exit poll. Stuart, what's your take, your tip?
Yeah, I had Labor going around 450 going into this. Of course, that's now I've kind of had to revise that to give Reform a couple more seats than I expected them to get. And again, that's not surprising. Maggie, you mentioned the technical voting. The Conservatives have never been good at that in the UK. I commend people who are politically conservative haven't been doing technical voting like, let's say, the left has been. They've had about 3 or 4 elections to kind of perfect technical voting by now, whereas the Conservatives and people on the right haven't had that chance. So I think we'll see a lot more people on the right not voting tactically, and that's going to sway things here. I had Lib Dems at around 8. I've now increased that. I thought that was a very positive, very lenient polling, or that now might be increased. Labor's behind where everyone expected them to be a lot higher than this exit poll says. Of course, it is only an exit poll, but definitely not the super majority that Labor wanted.
I think they'll take any majority, to be honest. And my tip again, Labor majority, no surprise. To be honest, I did actually think decent chance of Lib Dem opposition, and hey, I wouldn't be shocked if things go wrong and that still occurs. And it'll be interesting, right? And we'll get into this, and Maggie, we can probably get into this later in terms of Northern Ireland, because we don't hear about them a lot, right, in these polls. They have a totally different seat demographic as well. They have a party demographic that's completely different. We know obviously there's like Plaid Cymru in Wales is the main one there in terms of the Welsh-only party, SNP for Scotland. But Northern Ireland is just, and if we could go into this is, goes back to decades of Irish history, and we're not gonna go that back. But yeah, what does go on in Northern Ireland with the general election results and the parties?
Well, I mean, recently we've seen a bit of an increase for nationalist parties that want to rejoin Ireland. I think national parties got a plurality of votes for the first time in Northern Ireland's history in the regional elections recently. But we've also seen a much bigger increase in votes for the Alliance Party, which doesn't really want to focus on independence or staying with the UK, and much more on bread and butter issues like a cost of living and stuff like that. And I think Northern Ireland, there's been a lot of dissatisfaction with independence and all these talks that we've seen in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland.
Yeah. And again, just interesting, right? We're going to just tracking back to Corbyn, right? And these independents, right? So it's for Plaid Cymru, I think it's 18, as you mentioned, Northern Ireland parties. And then, of course, the Speaker, because they do that weird and different and wrong. I mean, you'd think after he's been serving since what, 83, Corbyn? You'd think surely there'd be something. Were there any other I guess, left-wing parties was Workers, Greens running that could have split the vote here? Because I don't know how close we're expecting it to be. Maybe it could be wrong, right? It's one seat. It's very possible to be an outlier. But if he loses, I mean, yes, they voted for Labor since 83, but they voted with his name there, and I think he's got some level of name recognition at this point, eh?
Yeah, it's a bit shocking. It's like if Bob Catter lost his seat or something like that in Australia.
That'll never
I
happen.
mean, with I think there's been an exit poll in Arlington North actually that I've seen with Labor 43%, Jeremy Corbyn 38%, but it's still a bit shocking that, again, incumbent MP for 40 years who's always run on being very left wing has somehow managed to completely fumble the bag here and lose his election on just about the exact same promises and policies. It's, I think, a real problem for the left in the UK. If they can't manage to get Jeremy Corbyn to win his own seat, then where else can they win?
Of course, as we say, it could change when the results come in. We'll figure out when the Islington North, that's Corbyn's seat, count is actually done. And we have to remember, for everyone at home, right, we're not getting predictions from different news outlets. They just call it. It's first past the post. They will just call the result. They will have all the candidates standing up there. It's really great. It'll be fun watching Rishi Sunak's seat. But I think that, you know, it's going to be interesting following that. Again, he could win, but nothing in the exit poll indicates that yet. Again, could be wrong. It's just one seat being one way or another could be interesting. We'll stick as well George Galloway, right? Because he won only a couple of months ago. He's obviously been a former MP, but he won. It was the seat of Rochdale, right? And he was campaigning on a couple of things. He was campaigning on Gaza. Of course, he's with the Workers' Party of Great Britain, which I don't believe has ever had an MP until he came along. Granted, he only sat for a month or so. But from what I thought watching that, and I'll get the exact results up soon, Maggie, but I really think he only won, and maybe you'd probably agree, maybe I'm stating the obvious, because in that same seat, Labor disendorsed their candidate, and to a very much lesser extent, the Greens also disendorsed their candidate. And he only won, I think his percentage was in the 30s, wasn't it, with some not that good turnout.
I mean, we saw, a plethora of controversies in that by-election. The Liberal Democrat candidate accused of performing a Nazi salute. But all of these issues definitely led to George Galloway winning. But that doesn't set aside that I think he's got a lot of campaign money, a real big voter base of dedicated activists. I mean, he's managed to field something like 340 candidates across the UK, which is quite impressive. That's similar to what the Greens have fielded in recent elections. I think he definitely could retain the seat, but it'll be very 50-50. Very difficult to see how he manages to fight against Labor.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the results on Wikipedia now, right? So he got it on 39.7%. Second place was just kind of this random, I understand him to be somewhat random. Maybe he's got a local profile, an independent, David Tully. Conservatives on 12, which is negative 19. Conservatives on 7% Labor on 7% disendorsed. That's down 44%. That was. Then it was Lib Dems, then Reform, then a couple of independents, disendorsed Green, another independent, and Monster Raving Looney. But like, a lot of that was partly first past the post. Then again, if it was preferences, right, and Galloway's up there with 40% primary, he'd win. But still, it's interesting following that. And then, I mean, what about the Lib Dems, right? They have been slowly going down since their big 2010, when, of course, they got into government with the Conservatives. Some Labor supporters would argue, of course, that started this whole thing 14 years ago. Ed Davey, I think he said it himself, he's run a kind of positive campaign. We've all seen his stunts over Twitter. And I think his favourability has gone up as well in the polls since this campaign started. How do you make of the way they've campaigned and they've run this race? Because we all see their the orange triangles all over, images, Lib Dems winning here. But I mean, 61's good for them.
Yeah, I mean, 61 would actually be just one of the best result for the Liberal Democrats in history. Very huge result, but I'm not exactly sure if that's a result of the Liberal Democrats' success or more so the failure of the Conservatives.
And the tactical vote as well.
Yeah, but they've ran a very interesting campaign, as we've seen, really get the media to focus on them, bring the attention towards Ed Davey. I know he's been a very unknown leader, but I think he's really made a name for himself with his past few election stunts. I think it might be interesting to see how the Liberal Democrats try and ride off this sugar high, this peak of seats that they have been nowhere near for a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, look, we've sent a man to Europe to be covering all this, Austin Pollock, and he was in London recently previewing these results and looking at the situation on the ground. He's been speaking to people on the ground, and he's having a great old time in Europe. We've had a very nice planned family trip there, really convenient for us. Here's what Austin's been up to in London.
The United Kingdom, home to 68 million people. Tonight, the spotlight is on who will lead them for up to the next 5 years. A lot has changed since the last election in 2019, including a few different prime ministers. Election night 2019, Boris Johnson takes over from Theresa May, and it certainly was the results that the Conservatives would be happy with, picking up 365 seats, Johnson leading the charge for Brexit.
To get Brexit done.
This was their highest number and proportion since 1987. All seemed pretty good for the Conservatives, but it was just a few short months until things started to change.
I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. It did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules.
As the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
Johnson was forced to resign after the Partygate scandal, where he threw the party at number 10 in the middle of harsh COVID-19 restrictions, before misleading Parliament, leading to the downfall of the man who carried the Conservatives to their best results in about 30 years. So then after Boris Johnson, Liz Truss took office, the last Prime Minister to be sworn in by Queen Elizabeth II. In case you have forgotten her name, well, you're probably not alone. You didn't know her for very long. She is the shortest serving Prime Minister in the United Kingdom's history. The polling didn't go too well and was forced out as economic turmoil from new changes she introduced gripped the entire country. So now we arrive at Rishi Sunak. He became Prime Minister late in 2022, the first Prime Minister to be sworn in by King Charles. He was the UK's third Prime Minister in just 2 months back in 2022. He took office with a rather agitated public, especially after the Liz Truss drama, meaning he had to do everything he could to get the public back on his side. And since that saga, the polls have shown a steady decline in support for the Tories since the 2019 election. On the 22nd of May this year, Sunak decided to call a general election. And let's just say the announcement didn't quite go as planned.
Rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy.
As campaigning kicked off, it wasn't long before the first major stuff-up had taken place. Sunak was forced to apologise for his decision to leave the D-Day commemorations early in order to attend a political interview with ITV News.
It all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was.
So apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure.
Then during that interview, when asked about his childhood and things he had to go without, he used Sky TV as an example of him being in touch with the common man. Perhaps not the best start to Sunak's campaign.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything
into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example?
All sorts of things. Like lots of people. There'll be
Absolutely.
all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. So that was something that we never had growing up.
And the latest polling shows very grim chances for Rishi Sunak at the lowest level since Liz Truss. So whatever way you put it, tonight is not going to be easy for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives up against Labor and Keir Starmer. And then there's of course Nigel Farage.
Guess who's back? Back again.
But the polls don't matter anymore. Tonight it's up to the people of the United Kingdom. So grab out your scones with jam and cream and fetch a cup of tea, because it's now time for the United Kingdom decides. The numbers are coming in and you're watching it all live right here on 6 News.
Yeah, of course. I had to do that once. I had to turn the mic off once during this broadcast. We are back live though, and we're just looking at this exit poll result, right? And I saw another interesting tweet from Irish Patriot on Twitter. What apparently is being shown here is the Conservatives are holding all their seats in Scotland, all of them. Which, from what I'm looking at the polling and other analysis, seems a bit unlikely. Again, I really would be surprised if this poll is a bit of a dud, as someone else said, right? And I think Lib Dem opposition is still real. Maggie, what do you make of this? And also, where is Reform winning here, other than the obvious Farage?
I mean, the seats that they're winning in, it looks to be in East England, East Midlands, these areas around Clacton, the area Nigel Farage is running, the seats that they've been expecting to try to win, especially in Lincolnshire. As for the Liberal Democrats in the exit poll, you have to understand that this is, of course, a projection on the seats based on the numbers. It's not going to be incredibly precise. I think the vote share, if they released it, would be pretty accurate to the overall result, but the seat count could definitely change. I think the Liberal Democrats could maybe end up as the leader of the opposition, but I don't really expect it at this point. Conservatives double the seats according to this exit poll.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just, from what I understand, apparently, like the 1992 election exit poll, that was apparently super bad. And then, in other years, I've had some hits, some misses. I mean, this is a pretty extraordinary election, right? In terms of the amount of parties contesting, and the Reform factor, that really, I mean, things could be really different. And I mean, I still wouldn't be surprised if Tories get down to single digits here, but I would be very interested in the vote share, right? Considering the first past the post and tactical voting and split voting factor.
Personally, I would be very surprised if they ended up on single digits. I think maybe Reform UK could end up as low as 3, but of course,
Did I say
tactical
single?
voting.
I meant double digits. I reckon under 100
Yeah.
Tories could get.
But tactical voting plays a huge part in this. There's a reason the Conservatives are holding all the seats in Scotland. It's because people are tactically voting against the SNP. And of course, the reason why the Liberal Democrats are doing so successful, even with not much of a change in vote share, is tactical voting. It's such a huge part of first past the post. We just don't see anything like it in Australia. The only thing comparable would be teal independents and people who usually vote Labor or the Greens voting teal independents, but we just don't see anything like it with preferential voting, which, as we both agree, is definitely the superior system.
Yeah. And you're right, because I think when we talk about tactical voting, right? Split voting that might happen in an optional preferential system in New South Wales, it can be avoided, though. We stress that. Use as many preferences as you need, folks. But split voting, right? Because I'm in Kooyong, right, and I can speak to this firsthand, right? The way that when you had the Teals as the biggest campaign, people wanted to ensure that the Teals were going, or the Monique Ryan, the independent candidate, would be up against Frydenberg. And so, I mean, the Greens vote just totally dropped. Labor vote was never really up there. And in 2019, it was the same thing, right? The Labor vote really dropped to get Julian Burnside up there for the Greens. So, you know, we don't see it much, but it's still possible. People do have to vote tactically in some regard here. Look, we're coming up to 15 minutes to the top of the hour here, and we're continuing our coverage again. I just want to remind you of that breaking news from the UK election, where there is an exit poll released. Now, in the UK, the exit polls are paid attention to a lot more. They can absolutely be wrong, though. And the exact figures for you, again, it is 410 seats for Labor. That gives them a majority of 170. Conservatives, 131. Liberal Democrats, 61. Reform, 13. The Scottish National Party, 10. The Green Party, 2. 23 others. And of those others, it's 18 Northern Irish parties. They have a different party system there. One Speaker, and 4 Plaid Cymru. That's the main Welsh-only party. Of course, things could be slightly different. That exit poll indicates no win for Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labor leader, running as an independent. No re-election for George Galloway, the Workers' Party MP who won the Rochdale by-election a few months ago in a contested and controversial by-election. But of course, things could change. Exit polls have been wrong before, and it would not surprise me personally if this one is. I would not be surprised if we see Tories go down to double digits. Ed Davey, leader of the opposition, that's the Liberal Democrats leader, still real. Keep the hope alive, folks. And Labor could definitely go up. Reform, 13, that is massive for them. They were teetering between 0 and 18 in some of the polls. 13 would be a huge result for them, and that would absolutely send Nigel Farage into Westminster, which would be huge. And he hasn't been a Westminster MP, has he? No, he's just been in the European Parliament when that was a thing. But yeah, that would be a pretty extraordinary victory for Reform, and they would be very happy with 13 seats if they can get that. And if this exit poll is right, we note, of course, the split voting factor. We'll bring Stuart Jeffrey back in now. Stuart, it was interesting, again, reading that tweet, right, about Scotland, because that result has been one to follow. And this is, again, predicting, apparently, that the Conservatives retain all their Scottish seats. I just don't know if that's going to be true. Not a single Conservative loss in Scotland, unless we're talking about some massive split voting factors. I just don't see it happening.
Again, I want to go back to the idea that whenever Labour performs well nationally, they perform well in Scotland, and then the SNP suffer as a result. I don't really see this as surprising. I know with our early figures that we had, I was actually at one point saying Labour likely, depending on how they go in Scotland. And I think it's no longer Labour likely, it's Labour guaranteed. But yeah, I always predicted that if Labour, didn't get a majority elsewhere, they needed to get the Scottish seats to pull them up. And of course, yeah, as I said, that's now incorrect. But again, I've always, put it as SNP performing low. I'm not going to go as low as 10 seats, which I know was a lot of people are predicting after the exit poll. I think that's overestimating the Labour vote there. But not losing any Conservative seats makes sense because the seats that Labour's contesting in SNP being a moderate in between Labour and the Conservatives. So the Conservatives aren't fighting to win SNP votes. Labour are, because the Conservatives know that they can't win SNP votes right now because it's because of the situation with Rishi Sunak and down in Westminster Hall. So I think that's coming into play there, is that these seats are being contested between SNP and Labour. The Conservatives aren't really involved. I don't think they'll win any seats in Scotland, but they will hold what they have got.
Yeah, and I just want to, speaking of non-England, I want to stick back with Northern Ireland because it's important to mention their parties are completely different to the ones that are running elsewhere, and especially in England and Wales. And a particularly interesting result, which I guess shows this, the 2015 general election in the seat of Belfast South, which had listen to this for if you want to talk about first past the post vote splitting, have a listen to this one. The SDLP had 24.5% and they won. Second place was DUP with 22.2, Alliance with 17.1, Sinn Féin 13.9, Ulster Unionist 9.1, and then you had other parties, the Northern Irish Greens. You had UKIP, so some parties do overlap. The Northern Irish Conservatives and the Workers' Party. That's different to Galloway's Workers' Party. But you can win with 24.5% of the vote. That's not even halfway to a majority of seats, Stuart. And you can win with that. You don't have to get to 50% anyway, which I guess might be the biggest flaw of this whole thing.
Yeah, look, I think with this, when it comes to Ireland, we've got to remember that for 2 years they had no parliament. The vote was just because the DUP refused to accept the vote for the speaker. They had no parliament, so Northern Ireland, I think, is going to be overlooked by Scotland and by England, but I think definitely keeping an eye on Northern Ireland to see how that goes in terms of people voting. It's almost a vote for independence per se, because of course DUP tends to prefer the Irish government. So looking at the figures for that, it would suggest again another shift should the DUP perform really well there.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll have to wait and see where that lands. Again, just guys, if you see also in the live chat, keep us with your comments, your questions, your analysis, your predictions coming. Any seats you want us to look at, we'll go make Maggie do that. But yeah, have your say in the live chat now. We've got nothing better to do. So first results actually don't come until like 8:30ish Eastern Standard. We just, but the exit poll, we had to be on here for the exit poll. I don't know which idiot at 6 News said we had to be on here for the exit poll and we had to all get up early. But I'm sure it's worth it. I'm sure our valued viewers care and want us saying the exit poll instead of just doing a tweet. But in all seriousness, thank you all for continuing to stick with us. We're going to be with you throughout the day, just remember. So we'll be with you with a lot of these seat being calls. Rishi Sunak's seat will be called at about 1 or 2 p.m. We'll wait and see. Rochdale, George Galloway. Rishi Sunak's seat is Richmond North something. They have long constituency names, by the way, guys. Everything is Shropshire and North something rather, and Upton or whatever. It's weird. They're really long, and I'm not remembering all of them. There's like 650 odd seats in the UK Parliament. Bar humbug. But yeah, I just really think that actually, sorry to cut you off, Leo, but again, just seeing another tweet from Irish Patriot, and he's quoting someone. But apparently, in Richard Tice's seat, so he's the former Reform leader, right? Who is now the party chairman. And Maggie, you'd be interested in hear this. He isn't winning. It's too close to call. The exit poll has predicted it, and possible Conservative holders at 48% probability, possible Reform gain at 45%. So I don't know how much to trust this exit poll. We'll figure things out. And Maggie, I'll let you get to those numbers, but I'll bring Stuart back in now. Stuart, just quickly on this exit poll reliability. Again, I always talk about here in Australia, don't doubt the polls. It's not all Murdoch. This is, of course, a different situation with the exit polls. I don't know. I just have a feeling that it's severely underestimating Labor here, or just dodgy in general.
I mean, I was expecting the Conservatives to be double digits. I know some people said as low as 80. I'm not going to go that far. I think the anti-Rishi Sunak vote won't be as high as we're expecting it to, because a lot of people will think it's a foregone conclusion and they're not turning up to vote. That's why people say, there's like, why should I vote? And
Non-compulsory voting, by the way, we have to remember that. And it's a Thursday.
Yeah. My mum actually asked me a couple of weeks ago, do they have compulsory voting? And I'm like, no, it's only us. I mean, Belgium kind of officially has it, but it's never enforced.
No compulsory voting discourse. Move on. Don't start it.
Sorry. I got hung up there. It's it's like you and your first past the post opposition.
Well, I won't shut up about that. We've got to fill time. But go on.
But please. Yeah, going on with that, again, Conservatives probably overestimated, Labor underestimated, but is it by that much? No. It's like, again, 450 was expected. So we're looking at a margin of 30, 40 seats. And if we keep those figures for everyone else, except the SNP, the SNP will get more than 10 seats, which is what some people are saying now. I think that the Reform Party vote will be lower than the 13 seats. Conservative is probably too high. I feel that the exit poll is leaning more right than it should. I might be wrong, but I think that's leaning a bit more right because everyone's thinking that, Labor will win means that a lot of people just, a lot of Labor supporters, are going to vote Lib Dems or they're going to vote Greens. And then as a result of that, they are actually, not going to vote for Labor. I think it's a foregone conclusion. And so that'll actually affect Labor and cause them to lose more seats than we were expecting. I think that's going to be a big thing here. Reform pulling votes from the Conservatives and the Greens for their first time ever, starting to pull votes away from Labor.
Yeah, I'm just interested more in seeing some of these results. I saw a clip on the BBC. Steve Baker, an MP for the Conservatives there, they say he's got less than 1% chance of him remaining as an MP, and then they cross live to him in the TV studio, which, if we all remember John Pesutto 2018, is basically just that rehashed. But look, it's looking like a lot of these Conservative ministers, and we'll get Maggie on this next hour, and we'll chat about it together, but a lot of these Conservative ministers are losing their seats, and some really big names as well, names that are known somewhat globally, which will be interesting. So,
I mean, when you look at Rishi Sunak, he would, if he loses his seat, that's the first time, if I remember correctly, that'd be the first time ever that a sitting prime minister has lost their seat. It'll be probably be a Campbell Newman moment here almost. In the same sort of
John
rise
Howard's
and
still
fall.
in recent memory. I mean, it happened 12 days after I was born, but I can still claim I was born in the Howard years.
Yeah, sure, we'll go with that. Says the guy who's born in 2001, who actually doesn't remember Howard. Okay, I'm gonna, as the oldest person, as the only adult here, but yeah, as I was, getting at, I guess, vaguely speaking, in a roundabout way, again, talking about the Campbell Newman moment, the Tories did well, in 2015. They kind of kept that rolling between until this election, and now they're going downhill. They had a massive spike, and then they kept it going, and now they're going downhill. It's the same sort of pattern there. Lib Dems playing a role there, but even then, we're looking at Lib Dem figures around 62. Yeah, 61, I think the current figure we're looking at. That's not actually their best result. Their best result is 2005. People will talk about, the coalition with the Conservatives. That was a big win for the Lib Dems. Actually, no, it wasn't. They lost seats. The Lib Dems' strongest performance was in 2005. So I think people here, as talking about it being a big win, and it is a big win. They've currently got 11 seats, but people who are comparing it to the coalition government, it's not the same level. It would definitely be historic, but it might not end up being as high as their best performance. Again, it's 62 seats in 2005.
Yeah, all right. Well, look, we're approaching the top of the hour, so look, we're going to take a break here, and we'll be back after the end of this short break, and we'll be continuing our coverage. And next hour, we're actually going to get the first real results in. Stay with us. You're watching, well, it's not election night, election morning, right here on Six News as the UK decides.
And online 24/7, Six News is your only source for independent and unbiased news across Australia and the world.
Join us on the hour every hour to bring you up to speed with all the latest headlines.
Top of the hour
every hour. These are the top stories.
Whether it's politics, sport, or everything in between, we will bring you every detail on every story as we set the agenda. Plus, our reporters on the ground are there to deliver you unbiased news coverage.
The biggest names in Australian politics turn to Six News.
Premier, welcome to Six News.
Anthony Albanese, welcome to Six News. Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
Adam Bandt.
Max Chalametha, welcome back to Six News.
We go head to head with the key newsmakers, asking the tough questions and getting the answers you need. Best of all, it's completely unedited, with no interruptions, revealing the facts you deserve.
Who doesn't love sport? And on 6 News, we cover it like no one else does. Our sports team brings you the news across all codes and takes a deep dive into sporting history, plus interviews with legends of our dominant codes.
Join us for Spotlight as we bring you key moments you may have missed, exclusive interviews, stories and major headlines. Spotlight brings you new insight into the major stories throughout the week and brings you up to speed with the current affairs.
Your 24/7 source for unbiased news coverage with our dedicated team, bringing you more variety, more content and more updates around the clock. Tune in and stay ahead with 6 News, your go-to destination for news that matters. Live on 6 News, this is Britain Decides, General Election 2024.
And a very good morning to you. It's just gone 8 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time and it's 11 p.m. in the United Kingdom, where results are coming in shortly for the 2024 general election. The exit poll that we have seen, Labor will be given a landslide majority of 170 seats. The Tories with about 131, the Liberal Democrats in third, Reform will get 13, the SNP just 10, the Greens 2, and there'll be 23 others. It is an extraordinary majority for them. In a few minutes, we'll be chatting back with Stuart, Jeffrey, and Maggie Perry to dissect some of what we've already heard so far, some predictions, and then later this hour, we're actually going to get the real results for the first time because they come in fast. Because it's just they announce them and that's it. There's no, prediction. There's no waiting. We will just hear the results, and that's what happens when you got first past the post. So look, we'll be all with you shortly. There's a lot going on, but in the meantime, we want to go live to the very latest headlines because there's a lot else going on, isn't there? Right? We've all seen Fatima Payman. That'd be the biggest story right now if it wasn't for this UK election. But yeah, there is a lot going on. So for the very latest headlines, we'll go to Darby Travers in the newsroom.
Leo, thank you. We will return to our UK election coverage in a moment, but to the other stories making news this hour. And Western Australian Senator Fatima Payman has announced she has left the Labor Party. In a statement to the media, Payman said she was torn about the decision but had been pressured to conform to caucus solidarity and follow the party line. She also said she had experienced intimidation while also denying that she would form a new Muslim-focused party, instead now sitting as an independent. The move does come just days after she was suspended indefinitely from the party's caucus after she crossed the Senate floor to support a Greens urgency motion calling for recognition of a Palestinian state. Payman will now be sitting on the crossbench, reducing the government's numbers in the upper house to 25. Just days ago, she told 6 News that she had hoped to remain in Labor and still had the party's values. Pressure continues to mount on Joe Biden to drop out of the US presidential race following his debate performance against Donald Trump. Over the weekend, his family members have urged him to stay in the race and not stand aside, but some Democrats are now saying he is set to lose in November. 6 News North American correspondent Wyatt Sharp with more.
There are several things that need to happen. Number one, senior Democrats need to call on Joe Biden to step down. Number 2, his family needs to talk to him. And number 3, fundraisers and those who actually fund the Democratic Party need to kind of express a sense of kind of disillusionment of what's happening with President Biden. They need to express a sense that they do not feel confident in the president. So if we look at those 3 things, we say, okay, what are the people who are in elected positions of power actually saying? Well, we had Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, say recently that she believes President Biden will not be able to win the state of Michigan. She said that privately, of course. She's not going to come out and publicly acknowledge that. But according to Politico, she said in a room of senior Democrats in the state of Michigan that she believes President Biden will not be able to win that state. That could be due to a number of different reasons. Of course, among them, likely the fact that there is some Democratic fracturing right now over the issue of the war in Israel and Gaza. We've seen polling data that suggests that that Democratic fracturing could actually play an impact in Michigan. But that's not really all. I mean, I spoke to Gavin Newsom when I was in Atlanta at the debate, in the debate spin room, and he acknowledged and he said that he does not think the Democrats realistically could go with anybody else. And he also said that he believes that President Biden should be the nominee.
Changing pace now, and roll up, the circus has come to town in Victoria for the school holidays. The Great Moscow Circus is currently in Melbourne before then moving on to regional Victoria, and 6 News reporter Lincoln Holmes hit the mighty big top to check it out.
It's school holidays here in Victoria, and for the parents looking for things to do to entertain the kids, I've got one idea. How about the circus? After all, the Great Moscow Circus is in town, and based at JL Murphy Reserve in Port Melbourne, the crowds are already pouring into the tent. For BMX rider Nathan Freeman, the more the fans, the better the atmosphere, and the better the performance.
The more they go crazy, the more we ride hard and put on a show, I guess you'd say.
This year's season has already taken the team all over. From Tasmania, where they started this year, to Geelong, to Mildura, to Bendigo, to Melton, and now to Melbourne. For singer Ali Rowbotham, her path was one full of training, scouring Facebook groups for opportunities before one day coming across the Great Moscow Circus.
I've trained my whole life in dance and singing and acting, and then I joined Facebook pages for auditions. I saw the Great Moscow Circus was looking for a vocalist, so I submitted, and here we are.
And she's never looked back.
Yes, I've grown up training, getting to work with them and live with them. It's just great. You feel like you belong somewhere and everyone's on the same page.
It was a different joining path for Nathan Freeman, who just so happened to get his opportunity to join the circus following a BMX competition.
It was about 2 years ago that I was at a contest in New Zealand, and had someone from the circus contact me saying they needed a rider for the circus to come over to Perth. It was literally like one day after I got contacted, I flew out to the other side of Australia to start working with the circus, and I've never looked back since.
Well, for performer Talia Webber, the circus is in her blood.
I'm actually a 7th generation circus performer, and I've been in the circus my whole life. I've been doing trapeze since I was 12, and I've just recently started doing the pole.
She described to 6 News how it felt for the circus to return post its 2-year COVID hiatus.
During COVID, we had to stop for 2 years. We just lived in our house on the Gold Coast, just did normal life for 2 years, and I was like so excited to get back on the road and perform. It barely feels like work when you're doing what you love.
For Nathan, he described the feeling of being on the stage in the middle of that big tent.
For me, I'm used to it because I go to big competitions and it's just maybe like 15 times how many people are here. So it's like pretty easy for me out there, but I love it.
Scooter riding superstar Reece Rogers, who is Australia's #1, put his skills on show, accomplishing a double whip. Worldwide superstars duo Acero keep the audience thrilled with their breathtaking pole performance captivating the fans. Whether it's the ropes, the BMX and scooter riders, the jumping, or the singing, the Great Moscow Circus certainly has something for everybody. After leaving Port Melbourne on the 14th of July, the next location is in Wangaratta, with their first show on the 18th of July. Following their wrap-up in Wangaratta on the 28th of July, It's then on to Benalla for 4 days only. But there's one last message from the team to those thinking of attending.
Everyone should come down. It's a good place for the family to come watch, and bring your kids so they can see us riding the ramps, and it's like a good influence for them to go out to the skate park and just have a good time.
Definitely come down. We haven't been here for 7 years and our show really is amazing from start to finish.
For sure, come along. It is amazing, acts you've never seen before and you wouldn't expect to see under the tent.
Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
Alright, and those are the latest headlines we are following. You can stay up to date by heading to our website or by following us on social media at SIXNewsAU. I'm Darby Travers. Let's now return to our live coverage of the UK general election.
You're watching Britain Decides General Election 2024.
And good morning again. You're still with us here on 6 News as we continue our coverage of the UK general election. That was Darby Travers there with the latest headlines. We'll be back at the top of the hour, of course. Interestingly, we're talking about Jeremy Corbyn here, and we just had a question in the YouTube live chat about that as well. He, of course, is running Islington North. His seat is an independent. He's been an MP since, I think, 1983. Was Labor leader at the last election, decently well known. I was speaking with Maggie about it before, and we'll get her on in a moment. But it was interesting, right, that it seems, according to some of the tweets I've seen, that they're putting it as too close to call at the moment. Maggie, you were pretty adamant or that he might lose. What do you reckon? You give him any chance of winning his seat? Again, it is an exit poll and it's a 1 seat difference. But I think George Galloway's on track to lose, so I think that one seems pretty certain. Muted.
Right now, the exit poll shows that Jeremy Corbyn, 50-50 chance of winning a seat. But again, it would be a huge blow to left-wing, especially pro-Palestine, independents and parties in the UK. If Jeremy Corbyn were to lose the seat he's held for 40 years, it would be shocking.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it looks like the Workers' Party and Jeremy Corbyn might still be denting into the Labour vote share in especially the London area, where it looks like they're going down amidst this landslide against the Conservatives.
Yeah. Again, just interesting. I just saw this tweet from Paul Hutchian, excuse me. The Daily Record political editor. I just saw this guy on my feed, right? So I'm assuming this isn't a parody account. This is a real person. He says, quote, a Scottish Tory source says the ITV predictions on the exit poll, which show them making gains. This is about Scotland specifically. Total bollocks and nonsense. The Conservative Party will not be winning seats like Stirling or Aberdeen South. Again, it seems like Scottish Tories have been overdone there. So again, we'll have to wait and see. And Maggie, I'm sure over the weekend, right, we'll be both wrapping things up as we actually know full results, because they're going to come in, I guess, a bit sporadically throughout the day. It is, I have to say, it is great how they do it when they've got all the candidates standing there and they announce it. It's peak, right? But that will be interesting to see.
I would
George
like to.
Galloway, though, is definitely on track to lose. Workers' Party MP, of course, he only got in a couple months ago, the by-election in Rochdale. But yeah, go on, sorry.
I would like to point out there's been some interesting developments. The exit poll, now some seat projections are available, and it looks like some high-ranking Conservatives, Grant Shapps, Penny Mordaunt, Jeremy Hunt, and especially Jacob Rees-Mogg are all expected to lose their seats. It also looks like a bunch of other Conservatives, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, all these people have a chance of losing their seats. We could see a wipeout of the seniors for cabinet ministers of the Conservatives.
And Penny Mordaunt was touted as a future leader. I mean, she was previously a candidate for that position. She wanted to be Prime Minister. She could have been if votes went a different way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think if she doesn't lose her seat, which apparently there's a 25% chance that she doesn't lose her seat, she will probably become the next Conservative leader. I think she has not a bad public image. She's seen as a moderate in the Conservative Party, unlike Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, who ended up beating her in the leadership contest. I think we might also see maybe Tom Tugendhat, who was quite popular in the leadership debates. He seems to have his seat held pretty safely. It looks like he might maybe contest for party leadership too.
Right. Well, if there's any left to contest the party leadership, we'll see how that goes. I would not be surprised if it's like the most random kind of safe Tories who no one's ever heard of and have somehow scraped in and they'll be leader. I mean, it's also interesting, right? I hate to talk about this, but I did see a tweet of it the other day about like you need like 10% of Tories to do a no confidence letter to get rid of the leader or something like that. Think about how small 10% will be in a party room of this size, right? Rees-Mogg is interesting, right? He is, I guess, well known somewhat. He's you know, I guess a recognizable guy. He's been around in politics for a while. Apparently, there was a French documentary on him when he was a kid, like 12 years old, fan of Thatcher, I think it was called. He's gone too. I think I saw a tweet of his son. His name was Sixtus or something. Not a bad name. Maybe I should name my kid Sixtus. No, I'm not that crazy. Anyway, no hate. I wish his son all the best. But like, it's just all these big names, right? Just gone. And I mean, this would be the Australian equivalent if we had, you know, Dutton gone at the last election, if we had Taylor gone, if we had pretty much most, you know, pick the most random ministers from the final Morrison government and imagine them being gone. And that seems to be what we're seeing here.
Oh, it looks like we've just gotten our first seat declaration with Sunderland South. Labour, 18,000 votes. Reform UK, 12,000. That's a pretty big number. Conservatives, 6,000. Liberal Democrats, 2,000. Greens, 2,000. That seems like a pretty big Reform UK vote share there.
Right, so that's one seat for Labour.
Yes.
So all we're hearing is 100% of seats so far are Labour. That stays on track, you know, could be big. We'll have a graphic at the bottom of the screen though, but we can now officially update that. One seat for Labour. Anything else? That's nothing yet, but one seat for Labour so far. That's a bit earlier than we thought. Hey, that's nice. Maybe we can all wrap this up soon. Yeah.
It looks like Reform UK were projected to get 23% of the vote, and they've gone up 13%. I just need to check out how they've done. Of course, no percentage, but it looks like they've overperformed what projections had, which is pretty impressive on their behalf. I think we might see maybe even a stronger Reform UK position at the end of the night than we started with this exit poll, which was already quite impressive.
Oh yeah, I mean 13 seats for them. It seems like nothing in the grand scheme of things, but going from 0 Lee Anderson, you know, that in account through a defection. And I mean UKIP, how many seats was UKIP getting back in their day? One? I mean
one.
Yeah, right. They had big in the EU Parliament last election. I think, yeah, it was them. But yeah, and actually, no, that one seat, that one UKIP seat, that will be Nigel Farage's seat, right?
Yeah, Clacton.
Right. We'll remember Clacton. Clacton's a seat to watch. Islington North is the Corbyn seat. Rochdale is the Galloway seat. Richmond North is Sunak's seat. And it's interesting. I just got mentioned on ABC Radio National Breakfast as a government influencer regarding Fatima Payman. Whoops. You know, my
interesting.
Bad. I'll listen to that back. I'm sure no one in the live chat has noticed because they'll be watching us and no one will turn to Radio National. Anyway, 8:17 a.m. here. We've got one seat called and 100% of seats are for Labor at the moment. So, you know, long way to go. But, you know, it will be interesting can we just get as well, Maggie, just on assignment, or maybe you remember, maybe you've seen, who is Galloway losing Rochdale to? I'm assuming it's Labor.
I will.
I mean,
just
look, I'll talk
that.
while you
Labor.
switch it up, but obviously Labor had it until Rochdale was at that by-election and won by Galloway. They were down like 44%. Second place was an independent on 20, then Conservatives. It was a pretty extraordinary result, but of course the Labor candidate then was disendorsed. And so, Galloway, of course, has been an MP previously, decently well known around the world. Somewhat, some would call him infamous. Is it to Labor he's losing to?
Yes, he's losing to Labor. I mean, this is a seat where Labor had more than 50% in 2019, which was a pretty bad year. I think we can all agree.
If we're honest.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, George Galloway is, as you said, very infamous. He is left-wing, very adamantly pro-Palestine, and that's what he's been in the media for. That's what he won his election off. He's also taken an interesting socially conservative stance that we haven't seen in, many other parties, but has been really growing in Europe and even Australia. We've just had a new party form of socialists who have some socially conservative tendencies, anti-woke, anti-trans, these sort of things.
Gee, imagine if we had some like outwardly socialist party that's anti-trans. What about the discourse here? Colorado governor tells Biden that the grounds full of people want him to step down. Wonder what'll happen there. If he resigns while we're live on air, that'd be nice. Really convenient timing. I'd appreciate it, Mr. President. Anyway, back to the UK, right? So Galloway's interesting, and I would wonder what his reaction will be. I'm sure it'll be fired up later tonight. Maybe I can DM him. We should get him on. Maggie, you can interview him. I'm sure that'll go.
Yeah.
Interesting regarding Horton and Sunderland South, right? And I'm just trying to bring up the results from that seat in 2019. Obviously, there's a hold for Labor. We should note, so it's no gain.
Sunderland Central, yeah.
I'm seeing Horton and Sunderland South. So maybe there's two called. Is that?
Yeah, this was a seat where the Conservatives had 35% of the vote. It looks like they're down to 10 or 15%, which is obviously a terrifying result for them, but not exactly unexpected with the seismic shift we've seen in polls.
Hang on, yeah. So maybe there's two seats called. Maybe I'm crazy here. I was just going to say Horton and Sunderland South, which is the one I'm seeing this off. Okay, two have been called, so we can update it for two for Labor. Sunderland Central's the one you've called. Sunderland, well, we've all called. Horton and Sunderland South is just the one I'm looking at the moment because at 2019, right, this was won by Labor, so 40%. That was down 18, by the way, in 2019. Conservative second 32, Brexit 15.5. They're now winning up 7. Reform has jumped up 14 to second place, and Conservatives are down about 20 to third place, right? I mean, if the Conservatives end up with something similar to or less than the Reform vote share, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some Tories start immediately jumping ship. Okay, apparently it is one seat. Horton and Sunderland South is the one I'm saying. Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some Tories jump ship. Stuart, let's go to you. What do you make of this? And especially, I'll get your thoughts also on just the way Reform's going.
Well, I want to first jump to seeing why we got that seat called as being two seats. The UK has historically had 1 million counties. So a lot of these double-barreled seat names or the and seat names are caused by the result of merging several counties together for a seat for voting purposes. So that's why you get a lot of hyphens or you get a lot of ands. It's because they just have these names. It's especially bad in London, where they tried to tell every of the London seats or the boroughs. They said, okay, you can only have one name, and then there were complaints. They ended up saying, okay, you can have a hyphen after all. So that's why we have so many ands. It's because they're combining different historical counties together. There are also about 4 different county maps of the UK for different reasons: postal, historic, elections. So they've got multiple different county maps, all with different names. So that's why we get so many ands and hyphens in here. But just seeing those figures that we've got here, Lib Dems in Sutherland South are only at 5.7%. That is a slight drop, but they are coming in not much ahead of the Greens, who are only at 4.3%, and that's an uptick of 1.6. So it's definitely interesting to see that that's coming also from the Conservative vote, who are down 19.2%. So chances are that it's actually good news for the Greens. They're coming in 5th, sure, but they've got that increase in vote share, and that's what they need if they want to try and force Labour to try and adopt some more left-wing policies, or some further left-wing policies. On the other hand, that's not really been their approach. Their approach is that we want to target specific seats to get seats in Westminster to be a more official party. Kind of the reverse to Reform. Reform's trying to influence the Conservatives more than it is trying to win seats. Kind of a different approach there. But somehow the Greens are doing somehow the Greens are going to cause more influence rather than win seats, and then Reform's going to win seats rather than cause more influence. So it's kind of a reverse for those two parties. But exactly, seeing Reform come in at second with what's this 13.8% Conservative, 29.2% for the Reforms. So that's more than double the Conservative result for the Reforms, who are coming in second. Big gap between Reform and Labour, about 18%. But Reform doubling the Conservative vote.
Right, will be interesting seeing what happens there. I just remembered, by the way, Maggie, we were talking about this other day, that party that launched on TikTok, the Conservative Workers' Party. There's our answer to Galloway. Not that they're running in elections or have more than 60 followers, but, you know.
I mean, I did bring them up, but...
Look, I got a bad memory. Anyway, I'm sure you did. Hey, just... elsewhere, I guess, regarding Plaid Cymru, what do we make of them, right? They're the main Welsh party, obviously, and Wales is more closely aligned with, I guess, England's party system than like Northern Ireland, where it's completely different, and obviously SNP is fairly dominant in Scotland, not so much now. What do we know about them in terms of where they stand? And again, they're winning about 4 seats based on the exit poll.
Yeah, I mean, they're quite a left-wing party, democratic socialist, and obviously Welsh separatist. And they've gone from what would be notionally 2 seats to 4, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, off the back of Conservative losses. I would tell you about the seats they've gained, but I think I would butcher them so horrendously, I would be laughed off SIX News.
Well, let's try. No, I'm kidding. You don't have to. I am interested in seeing, just where they go, and no offense to anyone listening, we're not going to pronounce anything right. So yeah, the first seat declared again about 10 minutes ago. Bridget Phillipson holds Horton and Sunderland South for Labour. That's not a surprising result, but I guess the biggest takeaway from that is Reform in second. And again, Maggie, what do you make of just what I was talking about before, right? If we're seeing Reform up there with Conservatives in terms of votes, not necessarily seats, because the first past the post, it seems like some Tories, I wouldn't be surprised if they jump ship, especially the more, especially Conservative ones who might already be in safe seats or had a high up Reform candidate in their seat.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that with Lee Anderson. I think he had some allegations going against him before he joined Reform UK, but there will be some Conservatives jumping ship, but I'm not sure how many. I mean, the election's going to be in 5 years. You have much time. I think it'll be interesting to see if Reform UK can end up with a higher vote share than Conservatives. If they end up in second place, that would be a colossal swing to the right and a complete disapproval of the Conservatives like we've never seen before, them in third place, even as some would say, the default party of the UK.
Yeah, and I also have to remember, right, in terms of just scrolling through these results, is that, reform, I mean, again, 13 going from 0 until a few months ago when Anderson defected, that is huge. And really, I mean, that's all down to the Farage factor. That is all the Farage factor, because I don't think they were polling above like mid-single digits under Tice.
Yeah, I think the highest result they had was 10%, and now Nigel Farage, we've seen the highest polling result for them had them at 24%, just 15 points behind Labour. They would have ended up with 100 seats if that result came true, but it doesn't look like we're going to have that now. But I mean, even the projections for seat counts seems a bit pessimistic, with Richard Tice not even getting the seat he's contesting, which has been considered all but certainly a gain for Reform UK. So Reform UK might end up with higher than 20 seats. I doubt they'll end up with more than the Liberal Democrats or anything, but a fourth biggest party in the House of Commons would be very impressive.
Absolutely, and especially if it's bigger than the SNP. Hey, we're going to get some more results in soon, but our man, National Affairs Editor and International Correspondent Austin Pollock, he has been in London. He's in Europe at the moment with a very well-planned family holiday, and he's been previewing all these results and really going back to look at how this race has unfolded. Here's a bit of Austin in London.
The United Kingdom, home to 68 million people. Tonight, the spotlight is on who will lead them for up to the next 5 years. A lot has changed since the last election in 2019, including a few different prime ministers. Election night 2019, Boris Johnson takes over from Theresa May, and it certainly was the results that the Conservatives would be happy with, picking up 365 seats. Johnson leading the charge for Brexit.
To get Brexit done.
This was their highest number and proportion since 1987. All seemed pretty good for the Conservatives, but it was just a few short months until things started to change.
I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. It did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules.
As the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
Johnson was forced to resign after the Partygate scandal, where he threw the party at number 10 in the middle of harsh COVID-19 restrictions, before misleading Parliament, leading to the downfall of the man who carried the Conservatives to their best results in about 30 years. So then, after Boris Johnson, Liz Truss took office, the last Prime Minister to be sworn in by Queen Elizabeth II. In case you have forgotten her name, well, you're probably not alone. You didn't know her for very long. She is the shortest serving Prime Minister in the United Kingdom's history. The polling didn't go too well and was forced out as economic turmoil from new changes she introduced gripped the entire country. So now we arrive at Rishi Sunak. He became Prime Minister late in 2022, the first Prime Minister to be sworn in by King Charles. He was the UK's third Prime Minister in just 2 months back in 2022. He took office with a rather agitated public, especially after the Liz Truss drama, meaning he had to do everything he could to get the public back on his side. And since that saga, the polls have shown a steady decline in support for the Tories since the 2019 election. On the 22nd of May this year, Sunak decided to call a general election. And let's just say the announcement didn't quite go as planned.
Rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy.
As campaigning kicked off, it wasn't long before the first major stuff-up had taken place. Sunak was forced to apologise for his decision to leave the D-Day commemorations early in order to attend a political interview with ITV News.
It all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was.
So apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure.
Then during that interview, when asked about his childhood and things he had to go without, he used Sky TV as an example of him being in touch with the common man. Perhaps not the best start to Sunak's campaign.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example?
All sorts of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. So that was something that we never had growing up.
And the latest polling shows very grim chances for Rishi Sunak at the lowest level since Liz Truss. So whatever way you put it, tonight is not going to be easy for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives up against Labor and Keir Starmer. And then there's of course Nigel Farage.
Guess who's back? Back again.
But the polls don't matter anymore. Tonight it's up to the people of the United Kingdom. So grab out your scones with jam and cream and fetch a cup of tea, because it's now time for the United Kingdom decides. The numbers are coming in and you're watching it all live right here on 6 News.
You're back live with us. That was Austin Pollock, our international correspondent in London there, and we're continuing to bring you the latest results from the UK election. Results have started to come in, and we'll show you at the bottom of your screen. One seat called for Labor so far, although I believe a second call for them has just been made. Maggie, what can you tell us?
Both of these seats are in northeast England, around God, I don't know any cities there, but they're both over northeast. We're seeing a slight turnout decrease since 2019, which is pretty expected. I mean, Labor landslide. I think a lot of people are not turning out to vote because they don't think it will change the result. That's not going to be a close result. But in both of these northeastern seats, we've seen Reform UK actually performing way better than the Conservatives, double the vote. I think that's definitely something to worry for the Conservatives as the night goes on. I mean, Reform UK up 18% in Blyth and Ashington, which was the second seat to be called. I think that's pretty bad news for the Conservatives and Labor to some extent too.
Yeah, Labor not so much of a worry because, I mean, we're going to see Conservative Reform vote splitting throughout, right? There will be a ton of seats, I imagine, which realistically would be run by either Reform or Conservative if there was preferential voting. Alas, that will not happen because they don't have it. You know, sucks to be them. But yeah, it's interesting, and it appears this is kind of the northeast area. I say, knowing nothing about geography, is going to be where we're going to see these first results, I'm imagining. But again, you know, currently with these two seats, right, and I'm going off the Guardian's website here, but the national vote total is about 50% Labor, about 30% Reform, and about 15% Conservative, right? So not good for them. Conservatives, that is. So we'll see where Reform goes. I'm sure this will have a long and heated Twitter discourse about electoral reform, but alas, too late for that because Labor is winning in a landslide here. Again, they've got two so far. We'll put that at the bottom of your screen in a moment. 2 seats for Labor. And as you can see there, the SNP. Well, you know, we had the SNP there, but you know, maybe regrettably we should have put Reform instead there because SNP is it's not doing anything yet. But don't worry, too late. We'll just have egg on our face. So let's see. I wonder where Islington North, because that'll be the count I think we expect to be called close.
That's going to be the count we're looking for
later.
I'll keep a track of these very important seats and see when they're expected to be declared. I'll just look for Islington North right now.
And of course, we'll remind everyone at home that this is going to be coming through right throughout the morning and in the early afternoon as well. So all overnight in the UK. Can you imagine if Australia was like this and we were having to stay up all night for election results? Imagine the fucking, oh God, I swear on it, the Queensland local government elections. The Queensland local government elections. Imagine them and we're staying up at 4 a.m. just to hear about Paddington Ward or, Braden Smith wins the Lord Mayorship, something stupid like that.
Just checking
Please
with
keep talking. Oh God.
just checking with Islington North. It looks like they'll be declared around 12
Well, I'm
Eastern
not
time.
waiting till 12. Oh,
That's a pretty early declaration for most of the seats. Actually, looks like 2 p.m. is when declarations will end. Also,
yeah. We'll bring Stuart back in as well here. Because we will. Stuart, again, it's interesting looking at where reform is picking up from where obviously the Brexit Party left off, right? Brexit Party didn't do much at the last election, as we all saw. They had pretty much served their job with Brexit. They've rebranded as Reform, and they've succeeded UKIP basically. Although UKIP, I found out, still exists, which is quite remarkable given the Farage isn't involved anymore. But I mean, if this kind of trend continues for Reform, I mean, can you imagine the alarm bells ringing in the Conservatives? Like, not that they already weren't ringing exceptionally loudly, but it's like I'm sure we've all seen that meme of where you've got the Allies closing on Nazi Germany on one way and the Soviet Union the other way. It's like Labour and Reform there with the Conservatives stuck in the middle. And they are getting hammered, really. They are just getting screwed. And wait till we see the Conservative seats. It'll look really bad. The Conservative seats of the last election, that is.
The Brexit Party broke from UKIP because they thought UKIP was too far right, and the Brexit Party became Reform. So Reform Party is actually a splinter faction from the UKIP for that one. So they kind of splintered off there. Looking at the northeast of England, that kind of makes sense. Let's think of your for our US viewers, all four of you. It's basically their version of the Rust Belt. It's high manufacturing jobs in that area. That's always been expected to go for Labour. There was a recent breakthrough in the area. It used to be called the Red Wall. Then the middle kind of went more conservative. And this is where we're going to see a lot of Labour votes come back in, controlling the entire north, which is what it used to be the case, because they're, again, pulling from that working class union base, and that's the dominant force in that area. So of course, we're going to see high Labour figures there. This is also where some of the asylum seekers come in, hence the high Reform votes. Reform votes will be higher on the East Coast than the West Coast, because I don't know many migrants who come around on the West Coast near Ireland. So Reform will perform better on the East Coast than on the West Coast. So that's not uniform. But generally, these East Coast figures, and I believe both seats that have been called are coastal seats. Houthland is really close, and the other one is on the coast, I'm pretty sure. So we're seeing these are where the asylum seekers are quote unquote taking jobs in these manufacturing areas. Hence, you're going to see Labour winning seats because union workers, but also we're seeing UKIP or Reform performing well because of that more conservative closed borders response that they've had there, which is why you're seeing there's such massive jumps for Reform. Labour still winning their seats, obviously. Conservatives massive drop because they haven't been strict enough on issues like borders and asylum seekers, and the Greens performing poorly, dropped by almost 3% in a second seat that we've had called there. So definitely, and only up by 1.5% ish in Sunderland South. So Greens not doing great in this area, but we never expected them to do well. I think they're coming in fifth in both seats, and that's to be expected. It's not their area of strength.
I'm muted. I'm realizing that. Picked up on it. Good.
Yeah, interesting. And Stuart, again, and I'll ask Maggie about this later, but it's interesting, right? The Green Party, because you have Green parties like all over the world, right? And in Europe, there's plenty of them. Some are in government. A lot of course, Europe has proportional representation systems, which I guess helps those Green parties more. But how much do you think the factor of first past the post impacts the Green vote? And it's not so much as, oh, they don't win seats. I mean, they never get up there, right? It's either winning or second place or nowhere. There's no like kind of mid results. They tend to be pretty low in most seats. How much of that is people just thinking, oh, they're just a vote splitter? Of course, I'm sure there's plenty of people who don't like their policies, but yeah.
Again, it's a matter of being tactical voters. And that's, again, as I said earlier, the left is better at that than the right is. Greens, as I said again, Greens have a different focus to reform in other parties. When it comes to this issue, again, they're trying to focus on specific seats, and that's why they're performing only a few seats because they're only targeting a few seats. Whereas reform is going a broader approach, not targeting specific seats, going for a much broader scheme because their idea is more influencing Conservatives than it is winning seats per se, and that's what UKIP did with Brexit. That's what they performed well because there was a risk of them stealing votes, which is why the Conservatives were like, okay, fine, we'll call a referendum, and then ended up being a success for Brexit, which is why I'm surprised that Jacob Rees-Mogg is losing. Because he was one of the big forces behind Brexit. So it'll be interesting to see whether he loses and there's a reform increase, in which case it's against him, like on a more personal level. But if it's a game towards Labour or Lib Dems, it's more of a massive policy clash for the residents within that seat.
Stu, I was just going to say, I seem to remember at the last election that Brexit stood down in a few seats, or actually no, a wide range of seats to help the Conservatives win. They haven't done that at all here. They've been running across the board. They have been talking about replacing the Tories here, which is a real shift, given, I guess, that they, I think even Farage himself takes credit for helping Boris stop Labor win in 2019.
Yes and no. Again, that comes in from your Labour voters who are more in favour of closed borders. When it comes to pulling from the left, it's more of a focus on specific issues. Whereas pulling from the right is easier for UKIP than pulling from the left. Think of it as One Nation, the One Nation pipeline. Reform is trying to rely on the same things that happened with the One Nation pipeline. You go from Labour to Reform, rather than going, which is their focus again, the One Nation pipeline, going from One Nation to Labour. It's the same sort of approach there. It's the other way around. And that's kind of what they're relying on here. They know they can't flip the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems are not unlikely to go for a reform vote, whereas Conservatives will and Labour might. So they've got a very different tactic to the Greens. That's why we're seeing this different performance.
Yeah, and that is an interesting factor to follow. Again, hopefully we get some more calls in soon. Of course, it is 326 seats needed for a majority. Interesting note, of course, and Maggie, you might know a bit more about this, but how given Sinn Féin don't take their seats, right, the numbers are a bit less. And also, of course, the speaker thing, which is really weird. But again, if it works for Sinn Féin, I mean, people vote them in knowing they have an abstaining policy. Which is, of course, an interesting factor. And again, we could talk about regional, Northern Irish politics for a while if we wanted to, but I don't think that makes any sense for us to be doing that.
Well, this election follows the European elections in Ireland, where Sinn Féin really significantly underperformed what people were expecting. Originally, they were polling up to 30% in Ireland, and now they're doing so much worse. And in Northern Ireland, it'll be interesting to see if there's any repercussions, if there's really connection to the rest of Ireland at all in these voting patterns. But especially Sinn Féin, we will want to keep an eye on. They are some sort of a force, even though they obviously don't take their seats, they abstain. Also, there's Alliance, which is centrist, pretty neutral on independence. The Democratic Unionist Party, which is very right-wing, more so than the Conservatives who want to
And
stay with
unionist,
England.
obviously they are.
Yeah. And the Ulster Unionist Party who once ruled over Northern Ireland, who have fallen into almost irrelevancy. They might make a comeback at this election, so do look out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting again, just following that. I really wish there was some more calls being made. But I think next hour they're going to kind of swarm in, and then from there it'll get steady. Again, past 12 though, as you said, Maggie, is probably where it's going to get really early. Really, really, a lot of calls. I mean, you're just looking at a live shot as well, from one of these polling places. And of course, it's interesting that how late polls close in the UK, right? 10 p.m. on a weekday, on a Thursday. So not a public holiday for them, or what do they call it? A bank holiday. It's not that. So, a lot of people still coming out to vote. And I mean, so many elements that we would recognize, right? The voting at the primary school, all of that. And so, it's fun seeing the elements they have that we don't. And so, I imagine that. And of course, as you'd assume, they run it late because it is a weekday. But I think they said, don't do it on a Friday because they'll think people will be drunk. Don't do it on a Sunday because at church, going back hundreds of years, right? And of course, they don't change anything because, nothing ever happens over there. Whereas, of course, we're smart. We have it on Saturdays like any normal country should. But again, I'm not going to become fully nationalist for our electoral system. Maybe I will. Anyway, two seats called again. Both are Labor seats. Both are held by Labor, and both have Reform in second.
I just wanted to talk a bit about the
please
Reform performance in these areas. I mean, these are red wall seats, and when you look at these seats in 2019, they saw really strong Reform votes, even though Reform UK only got 1% nationwide. I think in the second seat that was called for Labour, Reform UK was at 15% in 2019. These are very strong results and much stronger than UKIP got in 2015. And I think Labour should really be scared because, especially in Wales and Yorkshire, Reform UK got up to 30% of the vote in 2019, came very close to winning. If they just get small increases, they'll be able to nab off quite a few strong red wall seats in these areas. And it'll be a big, devastating thing to happen, especially I think the media will definitely play this up and talk about it quite a lot.
Well, it's the Farage barrage, right? I mean, it's his factor. It just seems enormous the way it's changed the polls since he got back into the race. And he was saying when the UK election was called, Maggie, I think he said something like the US is more important or he's too busy helping out Donald Trump, right? And he could be an MP in a few hours. I mean, realistically, he will be with that exit poll. What a turnaround. What a crazy turnaround. And I mean, like him or not, he has a name recognition, a huge one. He has definitely a decent supporter base, and he seems to have been able to rally Conservatives, lowercase c, to get around him, and some, of course, party Conservatives supporting Reform here as well. People seem to have wanted to decimate the Tories in some of these seats, and again, they could be picking up 13. I'm not sure how accurate that is because they're saying Richard Tice won't be picking it up. He's, of course, the former leader. But Farage, we expect Farage to win in Clacton, which, of course, was that one seat won by UKIP a few years ago. But, yeah, I mean, could you ever see something like that happening here? The one example I can think of is the 1998 Queensland general election when One Nation went up bigly but didn't win. Did I just say bigly? God. When One Nation had a huge or an increased vote share over the Libs and Nats, who were then separate but had less seats because of non-proportional.
Well, I think the huge key for these right-wing populist parties, especially in Europe, is a very charismatic leader who appeals to their biggest voter base, which is actually young men in Europe, especially 18 to 24-year-olds. We've seen parties like Alternative for Germany or the National Rally in France, who we're going to see an election from in a few days, doing amazing among this voter demographic. And in Australia and the US, One Nation, Clive Palmer, they don't really latch onto this demographic, and it's really important because young men, they have a lot of influence, and I think they really need a charismatic leader to latch onto this demographic. And the moment that maybe Pauline Hanson steps down or changes her game, I think we could see a big right-wing surge in Australia.
Depends on who it is, because I don't see Malcolm Roberts or Clive Palmer or Ralph Babet being the face of a new conservative movement in this country to the level that Reform UK seems to be at. But nevertheless, let's bring in Stuart again now. Stuart, I know you have to head off soon, but some of your thoughts as we approach this, and what we know based on the exit poll, and well, there's only so much you can read into these two seats, but I mean, still Reform leading in both of them. They are roughly in the same era. That's something. No, Stuart, you're
I
not
don't think
muted,
we
but
can hear you, Stuart.
Your mic's buggered.
I think, yeah,
There
the
we go.
quarter's unplugged. That'll be it.
Yeah, all
The
good.
quarter's
We got you
unplugged.
now. I'll just ask the question again for the sake of prosperity.
No, I got you.
What
I
do you
got
make
you.
of just how things are playing out, both from the exit poll, and we can only read so much from these two seats, but Reform obviously second in both of them, second by a decent margin.
Yeah, well, again, it comes down to that migration vote. Again, the One Nation effect. I think it was a very apt comparison to that Queensland election, although, of course, that One Nation vote completely collapsed because half of them left the party. And I'm not sure if we'll see that here, but again, relying on Nigel Farage makes sense. Again, we're looking at Queensland. Queensland only has one house. Normally, independents do well in the lower house and parties do well in the upper house. But Queensland only has one house. So to get a seat in the lower house, you have to be eccentric. You have to be a Clive Palmer or a Bob Catter or a Pauline Hanson to try and attract votes at a local level without being part of one of the two main parties. And that's what the Reform's doing here. Nigel Farage getting involved is that Pauline Hanson endorsement, is that Bob Catter endorsement. And that's why they're winning votes. If you take Nigel Farage out, or if you take him out, then the party will pretty much collapse. And that's why, again, him being present is why you've got that surge in votes, because it's a person who's recognizable, who's controversial, but being controversial means you get media attention. And there's no such thing as bad press, which Trump is kind of testing right now. But definitely in that sense, it is taking advantage of the Nigel Farage effect. And I wonder if that's going to become a thing we say after this election, the Farage effect. It might become a saying that we start using.
Thanks to Matthew in the live chat. He tells me my volume's lower than everyone else. I've just cranked it up again. If that doesn't work, screw it. You don't understand the pain I got through to get through to this mic, which you can't see through the magic of green screen technology. But yeah. Again, Stuart, have your say in the live chat. Of course, use hashtag #SIXNewsAU. We're on air throughout the day. We'll be heading to a break in a couple of minutes. But again, Stuart, how do you feel about the accuracy, just very quickly, of this exit poll, especially given some of these conservative Scottish numbers? And again, just saying that Richard Tice isn't winning. I mean, if you had to pick 2 seats or 3 seats that you'd think Reform would win, it would be Farage, Tice, Anderson. And if Tice isn't winning, I don't know. How do you feel about the accuracy of the exit poll, just on vibes? Give me 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's definitely under polling. Labor definitely. It does have that sort of bias against Labor. We've got a stronger conservative presence, which usually isn't the case. Usually we get a conservative lean in these polls. I guess in this case, it's Conservatives being silent about, like, not wanting to get bad press for being conservative, which we have seen in the past. But now you've got that right-wing lean I don't know why we've got a right wing leaning, but we somehow have a right wing lean. And so I think Reform's slightly overpolled, Conservatives slightly overpolled, so we would see a Labour switch. But I think when it comes to this, Conservatives are overpolled more than Reformer.
Yeah, all right, Stuart, thank you. We're going to head to a quick break now. Coming up, we'll be back with the latest headlines at the top of the hour and all the latest coverage for you. Watching 6 News Live as the UK decides. Stay with us.
On air and online 24/7, 6 News is your only source for independent and unbiased news across Australia and the world.
Join us on the hour every hour to bring you up to speed with all the latest headlines.
Top of the hour
Every hour, these are the top stories.
Whether it's politics, sport, or everything in between, we will bring you every detail on every story as we set the agenda. Plus, our reporters on the ground are there to deliver you unbiased news coverage.
The biggest names in Australian politics turn to 6 News.
Premier, welcome to 6 News.
Anthony Albanese, welcome to 6 News. Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Adam Bandt.
Max Chalametha, welcome back to 6 News.
We go head to head with the key newsmakers, asking the tough questions and getting the answers you need. Best of all, it's completely unedited, with no interruptions, revealing the facts you deserve.
Who doesn't love sport? And on 6 News, we cover it like no one else does. Our sports team brings you the news across all codes and takes a deep dive into sporting history, plus interviews with legends of our dominant codes.
Join us for Spotlight as we bring you key moments you may have missed, exclusive interviews, stories and major headlines. Spotlight brings you new insight into the major stories throughout the week and brings you up to speed with the current affairs.
Your 24/7 source for unbiased news coverage with our dedicated team, bringing you more variety, more content and more updates around the clock. Tune in and stay ahead with 6 News, your go-to destination for news that matters. Live on 6 News, this is Britain Decides, General Election 2024.
And a very good morning to you if you've been with us all morning, or if you're just joining us, you are watching 6 News Live as the UK decides General Election 2024. 2 seats have been called so far. They're both in the northeast and they're held by Labor, and both of them, interestingly, Reform UK is in second, followed by the Tories. So will that be a trend we'll see around the nation? That will be, of course, one we'll wait for in the coming hours. But again, 2 seats called, as you would have seen, those graphics didn't want to go away during the ad break. 2 seats called, both for Labor and both held by them. Of course, we're going to get more results in soon. We expect them to keep coming in this hour. We'll, of course, be bringing them with you live. Stuart Jeffrey just popped out. We've got our election reporter, Maggie Perry, with us. But still a lot else going on in the nation and around the world at the moment. And of course, we've all been talking about Fatima Payman, Senator Fatima Payman. What is she going to do after she defected from Labor? She'll be now sitting on the Senate crossbench as an independent. A lot of fallout coming from there. And apparently on Radio National, they said I was influencing the government over it. Aren't I good? We'll, of course, have the latest headlines for you on that now. Here's Darby Travers in the newsroom.
Leo, thank you. We will return to our UK election coverage in a moment, but to the other stories making news this hour. And Western Australian Senator Fatima Payman has announced she has left the Labor Party. In a statement to the media, Payman said she was torn about the decision but had been pressured to conform to caucus solidarity and follow the party line. She also said she had experienced intimidation while also denying that she would form a new Muslim-focused party, instead now sitting as an independent. The move does come just days after she was suspended indefinitely from the party's caucus after she crossed the Senate floor to support a Greens urgency motion calling for recognition of a Palestinian state. Payman will now be sitting on the crossbench, reducing the government's numbers in the upper house to 25. Just days ago, she told 6 News that she had hoped to remain in Labor and still had the party's values. Pressure continues to mount on Joe Biden to drop out of the US presidential race following his debate performance against Donald Trump. Over the weekend, his family members have urged him to stay in the race and not stand aside, but some Democrats are now saying he is set to lose in November. 6 News North American correspondent Wyatt Sharp with more.
There are several things that need to happen. Number one, senior Democrats need to call on Joe Biden to step down. Number two, his family needs to talk to him. And number three, fundraisers and those who actually fund the Democratic Party need to kind of express a sense of kind of disillusionment of what's happening with President Biden. They need to express a sense that they do not feel confident in the president. So if we look at those three things, we say, okay, what are the people who are in elected positions of power actually saying? Well, we had Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, say recently that she believes President Biden will not be able to win the state of Michigan. She said that privately, of course. She's not going to come out and publicly acknowledge that. But according to Politico, she said in a room of senior Democrats in the state of Michigan that she believes President Biden will not be able to win that state. That could be due to a number of different reasons. Of course, among them, likely the fact that there is some Democratic fracturing right now over the issue of the war in Israel and Gaza. We've seen polling data that suggests that that Democratic fracturing could actually play an impact in Michigan. But that's not really all. I mean, I spoke to Gavin Newsom when I was in Atlanta at the debate, in the debate spin room, and he acknowledged and he said that he does not think the Democrats realistically could go with anybody else. And he also said that he believes that President Biden should be the nominee.
Changing pace now, and roll up, the circus has come to town in Victoria for the school holidays. The Great Moscow Circus is currently in Melbourne before then moving on to regional Victoria, and 6 News reporter Lincoln Holmes hit the mighty Big Top to check it out.
It's school holidays here in Victoria, and for the parents looking for things to do to entertain the kids, I've got one idea. How about the circus? After all, the Great Moscow Circus is in town, and based at JL Murphy Reserve in Port Melbourne, the crowd's already pouring into the tent. For BMX rider Nathan Freeman, the more the fans, the better the atmosphere, and the better the performance.
The more they go crazy, the more we ride hard and put on a show, I guess you'd say.
This year's season has already taken the team all over. From Tasmania, where they started this year, to Geelong, to Mildura, to Bendigo, to Melton, and now to Melbourne. For singer Ali Rowbotham, her path was one full of training, scouring Facebook groups for opportunities before one day coming across the Great Moscow Circus.
I've trained my whole life in dance and singing and acting, and then I joined Facebook pages for auditions. I saw the Great Moscow Circus was looking for a vocalist, so I submitted, and here we are.
And she's never looked back.
Yes, I've grown up training, getting to work with them and live with them. It's just great. You feel like you belong somewhere and everyone's on the same page.
It was a different joining path for Nathan Freeman, who just so happened to get his opportunity to join the circus following a BMX competition.
It was about 2 years ago that I was at a contest in New Zealand and had someone from the circus contact me saying they needed a rider for the circus to come over to Perth. It was literally like one day after I got contacted, I flew out to the other side of Australia to start working with the circus, and I've never looked back since.
Well, for performer Talia Webber, the circus is in her blood.
I'm actually a 7th generation circus performer, and I've been in the circus my whole life. I've been doing trapeze since I was 12, and I've just recently started doing the pole.
She described to 6 News how it felt for the circus to return post its 2-year COVID hiatus.
During COVID, we had to stop for 2 years. We just lived in our house on the Gold Coast, just did normal life for 2 years, and I was like so excited to get back on the road and perform. It barely feels like work when you're doing what you love.
For Nathan, he described the feeling of being on the stage in the middle of that big tent.
For me, I'm used to it because I go to big competitions and it's just maybe like 15 times how many people are here. So it's like pretty easy for me out there, but I love it.
Scooter riding superstar Reece Rogers, who is Australia's #1, put his skills on show, accomplishing a double whip. Worldwide superstars duo Acero keep the audience thrilled, with their breathtaking pole performance captivating the fans. Whether it's the ropes, the BMX and scooter riders, the jumping, or the singing, the Great Moscow Circus certainly has something for everybody. After leaving Port Melbourne on the 14th of July, the next location is in Wangaratta, with their first show on the 18th of July. Following their wrap-up in Wangaratta on the 28th of July, it's then on to Benalla for 4 days only. But there's one last message from the team to those thinking of attending.
Everyone should come down. It's a good place for the family to come watch, and bring your kids so they can see us riding the ramps, and it's like a good influence for them to go out to the skate park and just have a good time.
Definitely come down. We haven't been here for 7 years and our show really is amazing from start to finish.
For sure, come along. It is amazing, acts you've never seen before and you wouldn't expect to see under the tent.
Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
Alright, and those are the latest headlines we are following. You can stay up to date by heading to our website or by following us on social media at SIXNewsAU. I'm Darby Travers. Let's now return to our live coverage of the UK general election.
You're watching Britain Decides General Election 2024.
And you're still with us here live on 6 News. Thanks for being with us as we continue our coverage. We've just got a third seat called, two already called, both held by Labor, with Reform in second. For those seats, we'll bring back in election reporter Maggie Perry. Maggie, give us the seat.
This is the seat of Sunderland Central, and
So
once
the one
again,
we
we're
almost
seeing very
called before.
yeah, we're seeing very similar results to what we've just seen. You know, Reform UK twice as big as Conservatives. Huge plummet for Conservatives, obviously. Anyways, results would be Labour 42%, about the same as last election. Reform UK at 27%. They didn't even contest in 2019. Conservatives 14%, down 21. Lib Dems 9, up 2. And Greens at 8, which is pretty impressive, up 5.
Right, yeah. Never a good sign when the BBC's election website has them in order and Reform's currently in second. Even if they're on 0, they're still sitting in second, which is, look, I'm sure it'll change throughout the night, surely. But this is, yeah, not good at all if you're a Conservative, if you're a Tory. Yeah, so where else are we going to see trends here? Because it's as you say, it's all around the same kind of northeast area, right? Around, that's it, Newcastle. There's a city. Well, there's an electorate called Newcastle upon Tyne Central and West, so I'm going to assume it's Newcastle.
It is.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to jut in, I did notice it was very interesting that in a seat, the Conservatives were a few points from winning in 2019. The Lib Dems and the Greens have gotten a higher combined share than the Conservatives. That is horrible, especially when you consider that combined, those two parties got about 5% of a vote last election. I think this is a bit of a devastating result for Conservatives, and also kind of shows what's to come in these red wall areas. They're getting decimated, losing 2/3 of their vote, which is even worse than I think any poll projects nationwide.
Yeah, and look, again, I know, I want to say things are going to change, right? I'm like, oh, surely Reform can't get second place from here. But like, also, maybe they can, because it's really, really bad for the Tories. I know this is not an area they were winning anyway, right? This is a Labor area, but still, this is looking quite terrible for them. Excuse me. Yeah, so we'll keep looking at these results. Again, we're hoping some more will be called soon. It makes things tough for us. But again, I just want to bring up that exit poll for everyone who's just joining us, right? Now, what we understand is, I'm just sorry, I was going to say, reading off the BBC website, it's important to note that there we go, there I am. The exit poll is not held in Northern Ireland, so the 18 seats there appear in others, right? And it's just Northern Irish parties. So the exit poll released at 7 a.m. our time predicted 410 seats for Labor, 131 for the Conservatives, 61 for the Lib Dems, 13 for Reform UK, 10 for the SNP, 4 for Plaid Cymru, 2 for the Greens, and 19 other being the Speaker and the 18 Northern Irish seats, which would imply no Jeremy Corbyn, no George Galloway, and Maggie Corbyn at the moment seems to be teetering 50-50 in terms of what the exit poll has predicted. Could definitely lose, though, despite being an incumbent of, 41 years? But George Galloway seems like he will be out, which is, you think of it as an extraordinary swing from the by-election, but also the by-election itself was an extraordinary thing. I think it's more returning to normal, right?
Well, actually, I've seen some interesting news on the ground in Rochdale of actually polling workers being afraid to call the result because it's too close. I think maybe the projections done by the exit poll haven't been too accurate in Rochdale, and maybe we might see George Galloway just pull through. I don't think he's ever successfully won re-election outside of Labor. He's been part of a plethora of parties, but it would be pretty interesting to see him win at a general election.
That would be extraordinary. We'll have our eyes on Rochdale throughout the evening. I think it's one of the top seats we're following. What about, we were talking about it last hour, but some of these Tory cabinet ministers, right? And we're talking some big names here. Penny Mordaunt, touted as a prime minister at one point, touted as the Conservative leader after this election. Looks like she's gone.
Yeah, just a 25% chance of winning. In the southeast especially, we've seen these cabinet ministers get kind of devastated. I mean, Penny Mordaunt, Jeremy Hunt, we have more, I'll have to see, but Jacob Rees-Mogg especially. In the southeast, especially around Portsmouth, actually, it looks like the Conservatives have been feeling pretty bad. Penny Mordaunt will obviously be a huge loss to her, I think, personally, that she would probably be the most electable option for a future Conservative leader. But we'll have to wait and see if she pulls through. I think it's quite possible, but we won't know for sure until the seat's declared.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll figure things out when that comes in. But again, 647 seats to go. Aren't we just in for a treat here? 326 needed for a majority, which they will get easily. I mean, let's be real. It's over. It's done.
But there are still many intricacies that we will have to find out for the results.
No, absolutely.
Labour's got a majority, but still.
Who's opposition
That's
leader,
a lot more.
right? I'm still a Lib Dem Ed Davey for opposition leader believer, right? I still think he can do it. I know what the exit poll said, but maybe. 9:16 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and you're still with us here on Six News. Let us know in the comments section if you're watching live on YouTube. Who do you think is going to win certain races? Who do you think will win Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn's seat? Will George Galloway be re-elected? Will Rishi Sunak hold his seat of Richmond North? Let us know in the live chat. We'll be reading out your comments, and also just give us any questions. Help us, please. Fill time. Give us any comments or questions you want.
We're just getting a declaration right now. It looks like in Swindon. Keep track of that.
Right, so it looks like we might be able to get another result in a couple seconds at this rate. What website are you on? I'm on the BBC.
Yeah, same.
Oh. Well, we'll see. I'm just madly refreshing. Right, but again, of course, it's 3 seats called for Labor, which we'll show you at the bottom of your screen. 3 for Labor, none for anyone else at this point. I am really regretting not including reform in that graphic, but it is too late. And the excellent work being done by Roman McKinnon behind the scenes, I'm not going to force him to make a brand new graphic because they may or may not win 13 seats. Too bad. Sorry, Nigel. We'll keep mentioning him on here, but can't be buggered making a new graphic. It is, of course, in the same area right now where these seats have been called in the northeast. They're already like Labor-held seats, right? So none of them are particularly surprising. But of course, the main thing to note, as we've said, right, it is that reform is in second, and in second by a decent margin.
All right. We've just got a declaration in Swindon South, way away from Newcastle, all the way in southwest England. Hardy Alexander has gained as the Labour MP from the Conservatives, 48% of a vote, up 8. Conservatives at 27%, down 25, which is pretty crushing. Reform UK 14%, new candidate. The Greens at 6, that's up 5, and others at 5%.
Right. So that is one for Labor.
Yep,
that
Labour.
gets them up to 4 seats. And that is their first game of the night, which is notable.
Yeah.
So there you go. So they've started to make gains here. I'm sure we're all shocked. But that is the first formal gain of the night for Labor. They already held 3 seats, and we should get some more results in soon. So this is what area of the UK is this? Do some geography for me. I don't have the map.
Right to the east of Bristol, in the southwest of the UK, it's South Swindon, Swindon South. That's the constituency name.
I think I've got to use forgive me for speaking of it on air, but guns or knowledge, and try and figure out old British railways and where they all line up on the map. That's the only reason I know these places. There's so many names. Cut down on the names. Name them all after former prime ministers. Win the seat of Sunak. I don't care. 2 candidate preferred. I'm presuming it's not 2 candidate preferred. That's our Aussie language sleeping in there. I'm presuming that's a popularity thing. I'm presuming that's preferred prime minister. This is definitely not a race between Sunak and Starmer in a certain seat. Ignore that. You get the idea though. You get the idea. That's some of the popularity and some of the opinion polls we've seen. Maggie, it has been interesting in terms of, I know it's not always accurate, but the opinion polling about the leaders, right? A lot of people say Starmer is, boring, uninspiring. Others have, of course, praised him. It depends on who you are. Sunak, of course, has come under fire. Ed Davey, as we mentioned earlier this morning, right? He's been the one whose personal popularity has risen the most since the start of this campaign. I mean, why couldn't you? It's been a funny campaign to watch. I wish we had our weird third party leaders doing that. Can't we get Adam Bandt doing something like that? They'll win 150 seats if they act like Ed Davey.
It would be funny to see Adam Bandt surfing at Bondi Junction, Bondi Beach, but we don't have anything like that, unfortunately. Definitely been interesting to watch the spectacle that Ed Davey has put on in the video. It's clearly had an effect. Left a positive imprint on a lot of people. I'm not sure how much it's exactly helped the Lib Dem campaign, but he looked happy while he was doing it, so good for him.
Yeah, it's. I think there's been plenty of comments. He'll hate having to go back and be an MP after this. He's just enjoyed the past few months. Yeah, interesting seeing that, and I look forward to seeing some of these more results. Again, it was Swindon South that was called a few minutes ago, which is the first gain of the night for any party, and we're going to be saying this all day. Labor gains from Conservatives, and bear with us, we're going to say election night because it is for them, and that's our usual language. And I know it's 9:20 in the morning and people are going to work, but forgive us. We have nowhere better to be. 4 seats for Labor. No change until that latest result. That's +1. Conservatives are down 1. No other results called yet. And we have to remember these results are called throughout the night for them. Like we're talking like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 2 a.m., 1 a.m. These results are being called in the UK. It is it'll be just past midnight there actually now. It'll be about 12:22 in the morning in the UK, and that's how they do it because their polls close at 11. Their polls close at 10 p.m. and their polls are open on a Thursday, a weekday, and I guess that's just how they operate. But it will be interesting. Again, any more comments you've got, let us know in the live chat. We'll do our best to read them out. Bear with me as we try to manage the internet on this. If you want to pay our internet bills, patreon.com/SIXNewsAU. It's not 7:20 a.m. Oh, I've got Perth residents.
Western Australians.
Well, got the WMN news viewers.
It is interesting. It's
no. This is what happens when you got a producer in the ear that no one on air can hear. Maggie, just go ahead.
It's interesting to note that the seat is one of Robert Buckland. He was actually Lord Chancellor. And that's the first of, I'm sure, many high-ranking Conservatives who are going to be heading out this election, whether they like it or not.
Comment in the live chat. Yeah, it is preference flows not happening that causes these results. Really, also I think Ben Raw from the tally room, he mentioned that the postal vote cutoff is a lot earlier, which helps as well. But they have more standing. I'm sure we'll get some live feeds later of Rishi Sunak standing there with Count Binface or something like that. Hey, we sent our man Austin Pollock over to London to be our international correspondent on this. He has more on the ground. And he's been in Europe. He's been reporting on this and he's breaking down what you need to know about the general election. Here's Austin.
The United Kingdom, home to 68 million people. Tonight, the spotlight is on who will lead them for up to the next 5 years. A lot has changed since the last election in 2019, including a few different prime ministers. Election night 2019, Boris Johnson takes over from Theresa May, and it certainly was the results that the Conservatives would be happy with, picking up 365 seats. Johnson leading the charge for Brexit.
To get Brexit done.
This was their highest number and proportion since 1987. All seemed pretty good for the Conservatives, but it was just a few short months until things started to change.
I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. It did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules.
As the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
Johnson was forced to resign after the Partygate scandal, where he threw the party at number 10 in the middle of harsh COVID-19 restrictions, before misleading Parliament, leading to the downfall of the man who carried the Conservatives to their best results in about 30 years. So then after Boris Johnson, Liz Truss took office, the last Prime Minister to be sworn in by Queen Elizabeth II. In case you have forgotten her name, well, you're probably not alone. You didn't know her for very long. She is the shortest serving Prime Minister in the United Kingdom's history. The polling didn't go too well and was forced out as economic turmoil from new changes she introduced gripped the entire country. So now we arrive at Rishi Sunak. He became Prime Minister late in 2022, the first Prime Minister to be sworn in by King Charles. He was the UK's third Prime Minister in just 2 months back in 2022. He took office with a rather agitated public, especially after the Liz Truss drama, meaning he had to do everything he could to get the public back on his side. And since that saga, the polls have shown a steady decline in support for the Tories since the 2019 election. On the 22nd of May this year, Sunak decided to call a general election. And let's just say the announcement didn't quite go as planned.
Rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy.
As campaigning kicked off, it wasn't long before the first major stuff-up had taken place. Sunak was forced to apologise for his decision to leave the D-Day commemorations early in order to attend a political interview with ITV News.
It all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was.
So apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure.
Then during that interview, when asked about his childhood and things he had to go without, he used Sky TV as an example of him being in touch with the common man. Perhaps not the best start to Sunak's campaign.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example of
All
something?
sorts of things. Like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. So that was something that we never had growing up.
And the latest polling shows very grim chances for Rishi Sunak at the lowest level since Liz Truss. So whatever way you put it, tonight is not going to be easy for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives up against Labor and Keir Starmer. And then there's of course Nigel Farage.
Guess who's back? Back again.
But the polls don't matter anymore. Tonight it's up to the people of the United Kingdom. So grab out your scones with jam and cream and fetch a cup of tea, because it's now time for the United Kingdom decides. The numbers are coming in and you're watching it all live right here on 6 News.
And you're still with us here live on 6 News as we continue our coverage of the 2024 UK general election. 4 seats called so far, all for Labor. Only one of those again. The rest will hold. That game, unsurprisingly, was Swindon South from the Conservatives. You're going to be hearing a lot of the phrase Labor gains from Conservative for the rest of this day. But I mean, who's really shocked, right? This is all what we expected. Ideally, we're going to get some more calls in soon. Keep your questions coming in the live chat. We'll love your feedback. And again, I'll just remind people about this exit poll. So this was, of course, Ipsos does it. It does it for the BBC, ITV and Sky News over in the UK. Labor has 410 seats. The Conservatives 131. The Lib Dems 13. The Lib Dems 61. Reform 13. The SNP 10. Plaid Cymru 4. And 1 for Speaker and the rest of the Northern Irish parties. So 170 seat majority for Labor is what is expected. Ginormous and unsurprising. Could it get bigger? Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, what's the song they used in their campaign? Things can only get better. Well, that might be true here for Labor. Again, that exit poll predicting a giant landslide for them. And we all know at this point, right? Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. This has come at a surprise to absolutely no one. If you've been paying any attention for the past few years really, but especially the past 6 months or so, I mean, the polling has been astronomical for the Labor Party and horrific for the Conservatives for a while. And for Reform, it's really interesting, right? Reform is pulling in the northeast seats. Reform was pulling in second ahead of the Conservatives. In Swindon South, they were pulling in at third, but I believe it was, Maggie might be able to correct me, but it was about a respectable 14%, which is not particularly bad. But of course, that was a Labor gain from Conservative there. 646 seats to go here this morning. And any ones you want us to look at, let us know. Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North, Rishi Sunak in Richmond North, George Galloway in Rochdale. Those are the kinds of ones we're looking at. I think the Greens are wanting to win Bristol. I think that's the seat they're aiming for. And they've already got currently 1 seat, which I believe is Brighton Pavilion, if memory serves me right.
Yeah. Greens are aiming for a few seats across the UK, but they've got a much more concentrated campaign than Reform UK, who's been obviously running across everywhere, running serious campaigns in Lincolnshire, Norfolk, Suffolk, especially those areas where they look like they're about to pick up a bunch of seats. Currently, exit poll says 13. We might see a lot more. As for Greens, they've got Waveney Valley in Suffolk, which they have a good chance of gaining. It would be very interesting to see a rural Greens seat. I don't think we have anything like in Australia other than
the closest would be well, they want Richmond federally, but even then that's kind of Byron and the like kind of areas anyway, so
and they're also looking for North Herefordshire, West Worcestershire, God, I
see,
can't
all the
pronounce
names,
that.
it's a joke. Isn't that the name of that sauce? Worcester sauce? Worcester sauce?
Worcestershire,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you,
Worcestershire,
Brendan.
and
Yeah.
Isle of Wight West. Both are a few rural constituencies they're running in, but they're most likely to win in Bristol Central, which, if I'm not mistaken, we might see sometime soon, which would be very interesting to keep track of.
And we'd love if they called some right results soon. I also want to remind people there are 2 people on air at the moment. We are really, this is what happens when it's at 7 a.m. But I mean, if we started at 8, like, I don't think we'd get anything better. Keep your comments coming in. Please keep them coming in. We'll keep following this, and I'm tired.
This is a good time to talk about, do you think, satirical candidates like Count Binface or Nico Omalana or the Monster Raving Looney Party, do you think they might have an effect on the Conservatives? They might take away votes from Labour.
Well, they might help Sunak keep his seat. Really, it's only a 10% margin between him and Labor anyway. Look, it is interesting, and look, I think that I don't mind having joke candidates here in Australia. We don't, right? We have, like, the ACT 89 election was a good example, but we really haven't had many since then. Kind of sucks. I think it's funny, and in a preferential system, it matters a bit less. In the UK, look, I get why they haven't, and some of it's interesting. And they have, I think the Monster Raving Looney Party has like 10 councillors or something like that. But of course, there is a legitimate argument that all it does is split the vote and helps the Conservatives win, if you're arguing that on the Labor side. But it is interesting. I mean, they're not going to win anything, but you're right. Sunak's seat will be one to watch. By the way, meanwhile, I just want to go back to Northern Ireland. Irish Patriot again, he says that BBC Northern Ireland is saying there are high amounts of alliance votes in unionist areas. Alliance, of course, being the centristy party, which will be interesting. Will this matter in terms of forming government? No, absolutely not. No one cares. But alas, it's possible. So we'll see how that goes. We've just heard some more developments out of Islington North, have we, Maggie?
Labour sources on the ground are saying that it looks like Jeremy Corbyn could narrowly win this. Apparently, as few as 1,500 votes in between Corbyn and Labour, but it does mean that Corbyn is tilted to win this seat. We'll have to keep track of this one. Absolutely huge result. I think we've been talking about it all night. Also, very sorry, I was saying Islington North earlier. Apologies to our 2 British viewers.
I'm sure all their residents are watching and are really upset. So by the way, those are Labor sources talking to the BBC. Regrettably, we do not have our own UK Labor sources. Got plenty here, but none over there. So that's via the BBC. And again, that'll be one to follow. Hey, maybe this is how bored we're getting, but in some breaking news, CNBC in the United States is reporting that Disney heiress Abigail Disney will stop donating to the Democratic Party until Joe Biden drops out of the race. So for anyone who's been following that story, that's happening. Yeah, make up the big breaking graphic, something we don't have any more details on. That's maybe Biden drop out. Maybe we could talk about that for the rest of the day. Maggie, will he drop out? Come on, help us out here.
There's been so much speculation about it. I don't think it's going to happen now.
But wouldn't it
we've been talking about it for ages.
But wouldn't it be good, for our coverage? Think of the coverage, Maggie.
We do have an interesting story rolling in Western Australia with Fatima Payman, who Labor has been raising citizenship and eligibility concerns about her maybe having to resign from Parliament over dual citizenship. She is a citizen of Afghanistan. Slight problem. It's a bit hard to renounce her citizenship of Afghanistan when it is currently controlled by the Taliban. So
yeah, and the
we'll have
whole
to
issue
see how this
happened in
goes.
October 2021, right, which was a couple months after the Taliban takeover. So yeah, that'll be interesting. That was reporting in the Australian late last night that says that some senior Labor figures are talking about maybe could it be raised, which is interesting. We're just talking politics here. It's the Leo and Maggie show now. Just talking about whatever we want. There's your live seat counter. Do they have 5 now? Apparently we've had a 5th. Apparently. Yes, according to the BBC website.
Yes, we have. It looks like, again, in the same area,
northeast,
Washington and Gateshead South, where once again, Reform UK, more than double the vote of the Conservatives, actually. Labour 48, Reform 29%, Conservatives 12, that's down 21%. Greens 5, Liberal Democrats 4, and Independent at 2. Again, we're seeing very similar results in the Northeast. I think if we go on to local elections next year,
get me started, local elections.
Reform UK could have very strong showings in these areas. I think definitely somewhere to look out for. They might really build their profile in these red wool areas.
Yeah, I'll be interested in seeing that. So yeah, that is again 100% of seats so far are Labor. Only one of those we note is again the rest are in an area where they already had seats, right? And no one is particularly surprised, or at least I'm not surprised. Oh. Yeah, I'm not particularly shocked by anything at this point.
Probably something interesting to note is that in all of these areas, we've seen a consistent, every single seat we've looked at, Greens have risen considerably, at least 2% up to 5% in some areas. I think this is probably good news for the Greens at the end of the night. I think they're performing very well in these safe Labour urban areas. They're not going to win them, but I think definitely someone to look forward to next election or an election after for the Greens to really build their profile, find a very personable, a likable candidate. I think the Greens could really win a few urban seats off Labour, say in Sheffield or Newcastle or London in the next few elections.
So what do you think a good result for the Greens is going to be here, considering first past the post, considering they're starting with 1 here, 2, 4? I mean, 2 is doubling.
I think 3 would probably be a good result. There's a few seats that they've been projected to win. I think I've seen 6 different seats that in some projections have been won by the Greens. Again, a lot of these are actually Conservative gains. Only one of these would be gained off Labour, Bristol Central, which, according to the exit poll, has a 99% chance of being gained by the Greens off Labour.
Right. That'll be interesting to follow. Of course, the Greens are different across the UK, and I think it's a bit reminiscent of when the Green parties here were a bit split. Scottish Greens are different, and then there's Green Party of England and Wales. That's the main one when we talk about the Greens. They're the ones with the seat, and then there's Greens in Northern Ireland as well. So that's their factor. Again, 5 seats called so far, 5 for Labor, 0 for anyone else. Only one of those is a retain. The rest are in the northeast, which are only one of those is a gain. The rest are in the northeast, which are all holds, and all have pretty significant reform votes, getting them up to second place. And the Tory vote is just going down. Really, only 5 seats to go. About 625 seats left to count, but it paints an interesting picture so far. And I think we've just had a 6th seat called, actually, if I just look at the BBC website. Also for Labor, big shock. And that seat is
Newcastle Central.
Gateshead Central and Wickham. Have we called that before?
Yes. Well, we've also seen a gain in Newcastle Central, where Reform UK, once again, double the vote share of the Conservatives, but this time much more solidly for Labour. I'll just have to check that out real quick and see what the vote shares look like.
Yeah, so I was just gonna mention. So there's one seat which was a gain, which was Swindon South. The rest in the northeast are all hold. So those are Blyth and Ashington, Newcastle upon Tyne Central and West, Washington and Gateshead South, Houghton and Sunderland South, and Sunderland Central. So that's 6 Labor seats. One of those is a gain, the rest are holds. And Reform is doing well in that area.
Yep, we might end up with not a single seat. That the Conservatives outweigh the Reform UK Party in the Northeast, which would be once again shocking. They've held so many seats in this area. They've gained so many seats in 2019, and Reform UK is just taking all of these away. I think the Conservatives are pretty much obliterated in the North at this point, to be honest.
Gotcha. All right. Well, look, that'll be interesting there. I mean, it's a disaster for them. And obviously, while the national vote makes zero difference in terms of the final result, right? It paints a very interesting picture. And if Reform, as I said before, if Reform does well, I mean, what's that going to mean for the future of the Conservatives? Nigel Farage just apparently said it. I'm quoting via Politics UK. I'm not sure where he said it, but apparently it was just recently. He said, Nigel Farage, he says Reform will win many, many seats. I'm not sure how many. He thinks there's many, 18, I think, was the peak in some of the polls. The MRP's 13 is what the exit poll says. I can believe 13. Of course, for him, it's fair enough. But yeah, what's the bar for Reform, Mackie? What do you reckon?
I think above, say, 6. We're looking at 13 for the exit poll. This is a great result for them. They might end up with as high as maybe 20, 25. If they can cement themselves in the House of Commons and avoid a lot of defections, which, to be honest, a lot of right-wing parties, especially in Australia, we've seen that with recently.
Yeah. I mean, with respect to One Nation, it does happen like really often whenever they have a boost. There's a lot of defections. Although I might note, we both seen Maggie Shot cut off, but like the Reform candidates, there's been a few who've quit over this campaign and endorsed the Conservatives. There's been claims of racism, and I know Farage claimed there was a setup by Channel 4 and over in the UK. A longer story. But if they can get, I guess, the most, serious candidates, not the paper ones, the ones who were, the bigger names, the deputy leader, I think, is running. You've got Tice, you've got Farage, you've got Anderson. If they can get them in seats that could actually hold in future, I mean, they could do well for themselves, and then they can pick up a few maybe ex-Tory lower-level ministers or just ex-Tory MPs in general if they manage to hold their seats and choose to defect, depending on how bad things go for the Tories.
I mean, Reform UK, they're already out beating exit polls, are doing better than expected. I think 5% better in Newcastle Central, where they've ended up with double the vote share of the Conservatives, but also the Greens performing very well, 8%. Once again, I think the Greens will be looking at some very good results in urban areas, maybe picking up Bristol Central.
Interesting.
Hopes are, however, that we say this every hour, we will get some more declarations, hopefully next hour. Stuff will really start kicking off at 11 a.m. when there's dozens and dozens of seats.
11? It's not even...
There'll be a lot of seats before that, but that's when everything is going to start being picked up.
We're on till at least midday then. We're on 24/7.
Oh, we're on till past midday.
Oh, are we? I can hear the producer. You don't get your name spoken until you go along with this. Of course, you can support paying these people slave wages, patreon.com/SIXNewsAU, $4 a month. Exclusive benefits probably. Well, we're going to be on until forever. Why didn't we think this out?
Why didn't you think this out, Leon?
Because not my fault they do this at stupid times. And I didn't have any guests on. And, oh God.
Well, we do have 2 seats that are set to come in very soon, which are
Talk to us about them.
I think Basildon and Billericay, God, these names, and Broxburn. Both of these are very safe Conservative seats held by 40 to 50% over Labor, with Labor only getting, say, 20%, which, if they lose these seats, which they very well could, that would be disastrous. They'd probably end up with double-digit seats, much less than the exit poll is predicting right now. Although, I think the unspoken loser this night has been Scottish National Party, who are going to end up losing
with not a single Scottish seat gold.
Well, that's what I'm following the exit polls with. According to them, 80% of Scottish National Party seats being lost, including that of the Westminster leader, who is called Stephen Flynn, in Aberdeen South, where even the Conservatives might end up picking up this seat. It looks like the Conservatives aren't having a very bad night in Scotland at all, but obviously everywhere else, horrible.
Interesting. Right. Well, look. There we go. A Sunday Times reporter said last hour, I think we missed this, Rishi Sunak to resign Friday morning. Okay, I don't know if that counts as breaking news. In fact, don't even put it up as breaking news. Of course he's going to resign. We're not going to have a stop the steal rally from Sunak, right? It's over. And evidently that will be clear. And of course, Friday morning will be like the afternoon for us guys, which will of course be covering on air. We will show Rishi Sunak live when that happens. You can be assured of that. Approaching 9:50 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. You're still with us here on 6 News as we continue our 2024 UK general election coverage, and it's nice to have you with us. Keep coming in with your thoughts, your questions, your comments, your concerns, your anything. Say what you want. But we really appreciate all of that. Keep those comments coming in for us. Hey, as we go to a break, a good reminder to look at, I guess, the state of play and how we led up to this election. Our man Austin Pollock has been on the ground in London during a very well-planned and well-timed family trip to Europe. France happening as well. It's all going really well. He has been on the ground and he's breaking down the state of play.
The United Kingdom, home to 68 million people. Tonight, the spotlight is on who will lead them for up to the next 5 years. A lot has changed since the last election in 2019, including a few different prime ministers. Election night 2019, Boris Johnson takes over from Theresa May, and it certainly was the results that the Conservatives would be happy with, picking up 365 seats. Johnson leading the charge for Brexit.
To get Brexit done.
This was their highest number and proportion since 1987. All seemed pretty good for the Conservatives, but it was just a few short months until things started to change.
I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. It did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules.
As the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
Johnson was forced to resign after the Partygate scandal, where he threw the party at number 10 in the middle of harsh COVID-19 restrictions before misleading Parliament, leading to the downfall of the man who carried the Conservatives to their best results in about 30 years. So then after Boris Johnson, Liz Truss took office, the last Prime Minister to be sworn in by Queen Elizabeth II. In case you have forgotten her name, well, you're probably not alone. You didn't know her for very long. She is the shortest serving Prime Minister in the United Kingdom's history. The polling didn't go too well and was forced out as economic turmoil from new changes she introduced gripped the entire country. So now we arrive at Rishi Sunak. He became Prime Minister late in 2022, the first Prime Minister to be sworn in by King Charles. He was the UK's third Prime Minister in just 2 months back in 2022. He took office with a rather agitated public, especially after the Liz Truss drama, meaning he had to do everything he could to get the public back on his side. And since that saga, the polls have shown a steady decline in support for the Tories since the 2019 election. On the 22nd of May this year, Sunak decided to call a general election. And let's just say the announcement didn't quite go as planned.
Rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy.
As campaigning kicked off, it wasn't long before the first major stuff-up had taken place. Sunak was forced to apologise for his decision to leave the D-Day commemorations early in order to attend a political interview with ITV News.
It all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was.
So apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure.
Then during that interview, when asked about his childhood and things he had to go without, he used Sky TV as an example of him being in touch with the common man. Perhaps not the best start to Sunak's campaign.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example?
All sorts of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. Okay. So that was something that we never had growing up.
And the latest polling shows very grim chances for Rishi Sunak at the lowest level since Liz Truss. So whatever way you put it, tonight is not going to be easy for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives up against Labour and Keir Starmer. And then there's of course Nigel Farage.
Guess who's back? Back again.
But the polls don't matter anymore. Tonight it's up to the people of the United Kingdom. So grab out your scones with jam and cream and fetch a cup of tea, because it's now time for the United Kingdom decides. The numbers are coming in and you're watching it all live right here on 6 News.
And forget the UK election. Elections ACT has just sent media an email saying the ACT Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elected body 2024 election starts tomorrow. So that'll be much more interesting. In all seriousness, we've got some news out of Islington North, and via the BBC, a Labor source is saying that they believe Jeremy Corbyn has won there. Now, that is obviously not confirmed yet. We don't have a prediction yet, and there was nothing in the exit poll saying that he would win. But, I mean, Maggie, that would be pretty significant, and especially considering, it's crazy to think about this man. I know it was 5 years ago, but this man was leading the Labor Party at the last election. He was the alternative Prime Minister at the last election. 5 years ago, just under that.
And what I find most shocking is that in this landslide, we might end up with a Labour vote share less than what Corbyn managed to get for Labour in 2017, when obviously he was defeated by Theresa May's Conservatives. I really goes to show that I don't think this is as much of a win for Labour as it is a catastrophic loss for the Conservatives, as we have all expected. I mean, I think many people would be voting Liberal Democrat or Greens instead of Labour, but tactical voting in these constituencies has kind of prevented that. And we've ended up with a very big Labour based off pretty much just losses of the Conservatives and not exactly any astounding policy from them.
Something else interesting, we've been talking about the impact Gaza's been having on this, and I just want to quickly read something from the BBC, which says that there is Labour nervousness in about 20 of their stronghold constituencies. Most of them have large Muslim populations where a protest vote over Gaza could spoil the party for some Labour candidates, including some big names. Polls are tight in Rochdale. We were talking about Rochdale before, weren't we? And there's very so independents standing on a Gaza platform are a threat. We don't expect there to be any significant enough right-wing vote for it to split and result in a Conservative or a Reform victory. But that will be interesting to see. Hey, look, we'll be taking a break in just a moment. Stay with us because we're going to have all the latest headlines after the break, and also a bit of a look at some of the rallies that have been going on in the UK recently, plus next hour and the hour after that and the hour after that and the hour after that. We should get a lot more results in 6 Labor seats called, and that is all that have been called so far. You're watching 6 News Live as the United Kingdom decides. Stay with us.
On air and online 24/7, 6 News is your only source for independent and unbiased news across Australia and the world.
Join us on the hour every hour to bring you up to speed with all the latest headlines.
Top of the hour
Every hour, these are the top stories.
Whether it's politics, sport or everything in between, we will bring you every detail on every story as we set the agenda. Plus our reporters on the ground are there to deliver you unbiased news coverage.
The biggest names in Australian politics turn to 6 News.
Premier, welcome to 6 News. Anthony Albanese, welcome to 6 News. Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
Adam Bandt.
Max Chellermather, welcome back to 6 News.
We go head to head with the key newsmakers, asking the tough questions and getting the answers you need. Best of all, it's completely unedited, with no interruptions, revealing the facts you deserve.
Who doesn't love sport? And on 6 News, we cover it like no one else does. Our sports team brings you the news across all codes and takes a deep dive into sporting history, plus interviews with legends of our dominant codes.
Join us for Spotlight as we bring you key moments you may have missed, exclusive interviews, stories and major headlines. Spotlight brings you new insight into the major stories throughout the week and brings you up to speed with the current affairs.
Your 24/7 source for unbiased news coverage with our dedicated team, bringing you more variety, more content and more updates around the clock. Tune in and stay ahead with 6 News, your go-to destination for news that matters. Live on 6 News, this is Britain Decides, General Election 2024.
And a very good morning to you if you're joining us for the first time this hour, or if you've been with us since 7 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. It's just gone 10 a.m. in that time zone, and it is 1 a.m. in the United Kingdom, where results are continuing to come in for the 2024 UK general election. You can see on your screen now 6 seats called so far. All are Labor, and most of them are just holds. The biggest story, of course, being Reform having significant gains. Our election reporter, Maggie Perry, is with us. But there's also a lot else going on at the moment, and we're continuing to follow the latest developments out of Western Australia and Canberra, where, of course, Senator Fatima Payman has defected to the crossbench. She's quit Labor, and she's now sitting as an independent over Gaza. And we're talking about the impact Gaza might be having on the UK elections in a moment. But as I said, lots going on elsewhere. So for the very latest headlines, here's Darby Travers.
Leo, thank you. We will return to our UK election coverage in a moment, but to the other stories making news this hour. And Western Australian Senator Fatima Payman has announced she has left the Labor Party. In a statement to the media, Payman said she was torn about the decision but had been pressured to conform to caucus solidarity and follow the party line. She also said she had experienced intimidation while also denying that she would form a new Muslim-focused party, instead now sitting as an independent. The move does come just days after she was suspended indefinitely from the party's caucus after she crossed the Senate floor to support a Greens urgency motion calling for recognition of a Palestinian state. Payman will now be sitting on the crossbench, reducing the government's numbers in the upper house to 25. Just days ago, she told Six News that she had hoped to remain in Labor and still had the party's values. Pressure continues to mount on Joe Biden to drop out of the US presidential race following his debate performance against Donald Trump. Over the weekend, his family members have urged him to stay in the race and not stand aside, but some Democrats are now saying he is set to lose in November. 6 News North American correspondent Wyatt Sharp with more.
There are several things that need to happen. Number one, senior Democrats need to call on Joe Biden to step down. Number two, his family needs to talk to him. And number three, fundraisers and those who actually fund the Democratic Party need to kind of express a sense of kind of disillusionment of what's happening with President Biden. They need to express a sense that they do not feel confident in the president. So if we look at those three things, we say, okay, what are the people who are in elected positions of power actually saying? Well, we had Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, say recently that she believes President Biden will not be able to win the state of Michigan. She said that privately, of course. She's not going to come out and publicly acknowledge that. But according to Politico, she said in a room of senior Democrats in the state of Michigan that she believes President Biden will not be able to win that state. That could be due to a number of different reasons. Of course, among them, likely the fact that there is some Democratic fracturing right now over the issue of the war in Israel and Gaza. We've seen polling data that suggests that that Democratic fracturing could actually play an impact in Michigan. But that's not really all. I mean, I spoke to Gavin Newsom when I was in Atlanta at the debate, in the debate spin room, and he acknowledged and he said that he does not think the Democrats realistically could go with anybody else. And he also said that he believes that President Biden should be the nominee.
Changing pace now, and roll up, the circus has come to town in Victoria for the school holidays. The Great Moscow Circus is currently in Melbourne before then moving on to regional Victoria, and 6 News reporter Lincoln Holmes hit the mighty big top to check it out.
It's school holidays here in Victoria, and for the parents looking for things to do to entertain the kids, I've got one idea. How about the circus? After all, the Great Moscow Circus is in town, and based at JL Murphy Reserve in Port Melbourne, the crowds are already pouring into the tent. For BMX rider Nathan Freeman, the more the fans, the better the atmosphere, and the better the performance.
The more they go crazy, the more we ride hard and put on a show, I guess you'd say.
This year's season has already taken the team all over. From Tasmania, where they started this year, to Geelong, to Mildura, to Bendigo, to Melton, and now to Melbourne. For singer Ali Rowbotham, her path was one full of training, scouring Facebook groups for opportunities before one day coming across the Great Moscow Circus.
I've trained my whole life in dance and singing and acting, and then I joined Facebook pages for auditions. I saw the Great Moscow Circus was looking for a vocalist, so I submitted, and here we are.
And she's never looked back.
Yes, I've grown up training, getting to work with them and live with them. It's just great. You feel like you belong somewhere and everyone's on the same page.
It was a different joining path for Nathan Freeman, who just so happened to get his opportunity to join the circus following a BMX competition.
It was about 2 years ago that I was at a contest in New Zealand and had someone from the circus contact me saying they needed a rider for the circus to come over to Perth. It was literally like one day after I got contacted, I flew out to the other side of Australia to start working with the circus, and I've never looked back since.
Well, for performer Talia Webber, the circus is in her blood.
I'm actually a 7th generation circus performer, and I've been in the circus my whole life. I've been doing trapeze since I was 12, and I've just recently started doing the pole.
She described to 6 News how it felt for the circus to return post its 2-year COVID hiatus.
During COVID, we had to stop for 2 years. We just lived in our house on the Gold Coast, just did normal life for 2 years, and I was like so excited to get back on the road and perform. It barely feels like work when you're doing what you love.
For Nathan, he described the feeling of being on the stage in the middle of that big tent.
For me, I'm used to it because I go to big competitions and it's just maybe like 15 times how many people are here. So it's like pretty easy for me out there, but I love it.
Scooter riding superstar Reece Rogers, who is Australia's #1, put his skills on show, accomplishing a double whip. Worldwide superstars duo Acero keep the audience thrilled with their breathtaking pole performance captivating the fans. Whether it's the ropes, the BMX and scooter riders, the jumping or the singing, the Great Moscow Circus certainly has something for everybody. After leaving Port Melbourne on the 14th of July, the next location is in Wangaratta, with their first show on the 18th of July. Following their wrap-up in Wangaratta on the 28th of July, it's then on to Benalla for 4 days only. But there's one last message from the team to those thinking of attending.
Everyone should come down. It's a good place for the family to come watch, and bring your kids so they can see us riding the ramps, and it's like a good influence for them to go out to the skate park and just have a good time.
Definitely come down. We haven't been here for 7 years and our show really is amazing from start to finish.
For sure, come along. It is amazing, acts you've never seen before and you wouldn't expect to see under the tent.
Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
Alright, and those are the latest headlines we are following. You can stay up to date by heading to our website or by following us on social media at SIXNewsAU. I'm Darby Travers. Let's now return to our live coverage of the UK general election.
You're watching Britain Decides General Election 2024.
Darby Travers in the Six News here and there. I'm Leo Puglisi in Melbourne, and we're continuing our coverage here. We've just learnt that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is expected to step down as UK Prime Minister in the next few hours. It'll be Friday morning in the UK. That's later today, sometime in the afternoon. Who's surprised? No one. I mean, he kind of has to. He's not going to do a stop the steal thing, right? It's over. It'll be interesting to follow. Something interesting, Maggie, and I'm sure you would have followed what happened here in Chingford. Ian Duncan Smith, who's a Tory, who's a Tory, yeah. The BBC exit poll. No, I was just going to say
he's a Tory cabinet minister.
Yeah, I should remember that. The BBC exit poll said he had a 99% chance of losing. But apparently, it's a much tighter race thanks to the classic voter split. The Labor vote is split because you might remember Faiza Shaheen was the original Labor candidate and she was deselected. And she's standing as an independent. So it's looking like a three-way split. So first past the post strikes again,
It would be interesting if the first Conservative hold was something they only won by 2% last election. Oh, also looks like BBC has found another declared seat, and it would be... No idea. Love the BBC. But
God damn it.
that's also for Labour. 7 for Labour.
It looks like a hold. They're not saying plus another. So whatever they've got to hold, let's take an educated guess and say it's in the northeast. Yeah.
We should probably also obviously there's also big elections in France in just 3 days actually.
This weekend,
yes. Where Marine Le Pen is currently fighting to get a majority in the French Assembly with her party, the National Rally. Of course, this is amidst a right-wing populist wave in Europe. And interestingly, a team between centrists and socialists has emerged to fight against her, and it might actually present prevent her from winning a majority, which would be pretty shocking. All polls have polled to shown that she would get a majority of seats, and now it looks like Macron might be able to prevent that.
Yeah, I'm just looking also, just scrolling. GB News, they say that the results show Reform dropping from 13 to 9 seats based on these new results. The exit poll had them at 13. I'm not sure what'll happen there. Again, I'm kind of dodgy with the whole thing of the exit poll. Some may doubt it. I do too. But still, I look forward to seeing more of the count. Again, you're right. I'm just really trying to see. Okay,
It looks like the seat that was declared is Gateshead Central and Wickham.
Didn't we already have that one? Or was there a very similar name?
Different Gateshead.
Of course it was. Also, I just sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Conservatives have actually fallen into fourth in the seat behind the Liberal Democrats on 12%, almost behind the Greens on 8%, behind Reform on 21%, and of course Labour 45%.
Right. Also, I'm just getting this from Politics UK on Twitter. The Lib Dems have declared victory in 12 seats. I'm not sure how many of these are holds or not, but they are Torbay, North Cornwall, Yeovil, Eastleigh, Wimbledon, Woking. Yeah.
Wokingham?
No, it's just Woking. So no. Guildford, South Cambridgeshire, Cheadle, Hazel Grove, Wokingham, and Lewes. So they've called them Davies Dozen. So they've got at least 12 seats. They could get up to 61. I think some other Lib Dem on the BBC just called it a once in a century result. And you're right. I think Stuart mentioned it before when he was with us, how even like 2010 when they got the coalition, that wasn't their best result. It was 2005. So you have to remember, of course, the Liberal Democrats have only existed since 1988 or something. There was the Liberal Party before that.
And the Social Democrats.
Yep, and there is still a Social Democrats, although it's like a weird conservative leftist kind of thing. It's basically the Workers' Party, actually. But never, and there was another SDP in between from like 2 years. Long story, they all have the same logo. It's really, really super weird. But yeah, Lib Dems, they are having a pretty good night, and I think they'll be happy. They have gone down and down and down, and they always talk about what are the buzzwords: austerity and young people and betrayal and Tory and coalition and Clegg. But it looks pretty
Clegg.
Okay for them. Yeah, looks okay for them at the moment. 61 seats is what they were predicted, and yeah, that is pretty extraordinary how bad the Conservatives are dropping in some of these seats to Reform. Speaking of Reform, Nigel Farage, I mean, he has been out everywhere recently. Obviously, he only started his campaigning several weeks ago, right? And he took over from Richard Tice as leader, and that has clearly given Reform a boost in the polls. Here's a bit of what Farage was saying just on the last few days of campaigning in one of his Reform UK rallies, which have attracted a pretty decent crowd. This is a bit of what he had to say. Okay, apparently having a few tech issues there. I trust we didn't play anything wrong. To our now unnamed producer, you're now on the bad books and don't get your name. I trust you will check your phone to see if any music was playing in that clip, and you can just leave it on the 2 shot for about 30 seconds. No, are you sure no audio was playing out? No audio was playing out, Mr. Producer? All right, Roman. Okay, so here we go. The BBC just said, "Are you ready for an onslaught of results?" We are too. So, Maggie, we might get something interesting, and viewers at home, finally something. There's only been 7 results, actually. Swindon South, by the way, the Conservative there was, I think you mentioned it, but it was Robert Buckland, and he was the former Justice Secretary. So, not exactly the most high-profile Tory, but not exactly, random backbencher either. Hey, who's that guy who kind of looks like Boris Johnson, but has that mop of hair and, like he's a Conservative MP, and it's like a total mop, but it's like really bleached. I don't know. I wonder what he's doing in this set. I saw a YouTube video of him. Kind of looks like off-brand Boris. If anyone knows who he is in the live chat, please say, like, it's orange, mop of hair, and he's Conservative. And... anyone call him Farage?
In other news, it looks like Labour in the North is worried that they might actually lose seats to Reform. Apparently, they cannot believe the Reform votes coming in and are now worried about unexpected losses, which would be pretty huge if Labour managed to lose a bunch of seats to Reform. In a landslide,
that would definitely
pretty
be
unexpected.
Because you'd think the seats Reform are picking up are the ones from Conservatives. Naturally, you think.
Yes,
that
but
anyway.
they do pretty well in Red Wall. It's sort of like how One Nation in 1998. The demographics they did the best in were more so working class men in suburban areas, which were a demographic that traditionally Labour had won, but using populist policy, they've actually managed to win back and bring over to the right wing again. And I think we've seen that in the UK as well, with Reform stealing a lot of votes from what looks like Labour. Even in a landslide, a lot of these seats, Labour's going up only 1-2%.
It'll be interesting to follow that. Hey, I think we're going to try again. We've got a bit of what Farage was saying in the last few days of campaigning. I'm hoping no music plays on this. But this is from the Reform UK and a bit of Nigel Farage in the final days of campaigning. Let's see if we can play that. I think it is.
Wow. Wow. Good afternoon, Birmingham. Welcome to the thinking man and thinking woman's alternative to Glastonbury. Are we having fun? Good. I'm going to tell you what, unlike all the other stuffed shirts, we are real people. We believe in ourselves. We believe in our country. We believe in our future. But we also believe in having fun and enjoying life and being optimistic about the future of our great country. Now, I got to tell you, the last time I was in front of a crowd like this, it was the 31st of January 2020, and we were in Parliament Square, and it was the moment that we finally left the European Union, and Richard and I were up on stage, and what a moment! What a moment! It was something that I campaigned for over a quarter of a century, and it was simply because I believed for all that time that the best people to govern Britain were the British people themselves. That's what it was all about. Anyway, it was my honour to do the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom! And of course, the fireworks, which we always have. And we're out. And I thought, well, I've achieved my life's goal. We've got back the self-governance of our nation, and it's time for me to walk away. It's time for me to walk away from active politics, having done it for a quarter of a century, including, of course, 20 years in the European Parliament. An experience which I enjoyed a lot more than they did, let me tell you. And so, for the last 4 years, life has been pretty good. I've been able to help get GB News off the ground and do 4 shows a week, which I've loved. I've loved. I've been back and forth across the Atlantic like a commuter, speaking at colleges, speaking at conventions. All 4 of my children are now grown up. Indeed, so much so that this week, on of all days, the 23rd of June, the 8th anniversary of Brexit, my first grandson was born as well. So life has been pretty good. Life has been content. I've not needed to work much on Saturdays and Sundays. I've not been subject to endless media attacks. We might come back to that, funnily enough. And I've earned more money than I've earned for 30 years, and life has been great. And suddenly Rishi calls a general election. At very short notice, I thought, well, it's impossible. I can't possibly come back with just 4 weeks to go. But I began to realise, as I travelled around the country, that I simply could not stand aside when the choice, or lack of choice, is between slippery Sunak, the biggest spinner since Blair, who's trying to convince us in what is now the 5th consecutive Conservative manifesto that somehow they're a party of low tax, when they put the tax burden up to the highest it's been since 1948, to convince us that they're a party of low immigration levels, and they got an 80-seat majority in 2019 on the back of that, and remember, with considerable support from the Brexit Party as well. We helped them enormously. But I couldn't stand aside and be lied to for the 5th manifesto in a row, when under Rishi Sunak's premiership, we've let in 2.5 million people in the last 2 years alone. Think about it. 1 in 30 people in this country has come in since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. And I couldn't stand aside and see a Labour leader. When I say leader, I don't believe the man has any leadership qualities whatsoever. None. And I think to lead a country through difficult times in a war that is in, I wouldn't quite go as far as that, sir, but I get the point. I do get the point. We need someone leading our country in difficult times when the world is perhaps in a more perilous place than it's been at any point in our lifetimes you do need a degree of charisma. Now, Keir Starmer has the charisma of a... Well, I did use this 10 years ago in the European Parliament, but I'm going to dig it out of the cupboard. He has the charisma of a damp rag. And what does he stand for? What does he stand for? He can't even define what a woman is. He flips and flops and changes his mind. So I couldn't stand aside. I couldn't stand aside with a country that's in economic decline. And think about this. GDP per capita has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters. People are getting poorer. And I couldn't stand aside in a country that is in genuine societal decline. Safety, people fearful of going out at night, people scared to even go out to their local pub, knives being carried wholesale by young people in our country. So we are, I've no doubt, in societal decline. And I couldn't stand aside in a country that is in cultural decline. And I must say, I thought young Zia spoke absolutely magnificently. Magnificently. A country that has forgotten what it is. A country that's forgotten where we come from. A country that doesn't seem to value our culture, our inheritance, and what we wish to pass on to our children. So I felt I couldn't stand aside with all of these things going on. And exactly 4 weeks ago, almost to the minute, I made a decision. And that decision was I was going to come out of retirement and come back to lead you. And what an unbelievable 4 weeks it has been. I'll tell you something, I've no doubt, something is happening out there. Something remarkable is happening out there, and I'm seeing it across all ages. Never before have I seen so many young people concerned about the future of their country. It's great. Really great. And this awakening crosses all classes.
You're back with us live here on 6 News as we continue our coverage of the UK election. Don't you just love when you think your AirPods are charged, but they don't? And now I'm one, and I've got like 3% on that, 30 actually. Few developments since we took that pre-recorded couple days old speech. Maggie, what have you got for us? Because I saw one tweet, and apparently the BBC is projecting that the Liberal Democrats will pick up the seat of Finchley, which was once held by Margaret Thatcher. So someone else in the reply said twisting the knife in a bit. But a few other developments as well. What do we know?
Very interesting result in the seat of South Shields. You'll never believe it. It's up near Newcastle. Labor hold, of course, but nevertheless, Labor 41%, Reform 23%. May I mention Labor gone down 3, Reform up 8, Green 15%. That's up 12%. Higher than the Conservatives, who are at just 11, down 14. Independent 6, Liberal Democrat 4. That's a pretty astounding result for the Greens. That's more than quadrupling their vote share that they got in 2019. I think this is pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Greens, obviously, as you mentioned before, right, they're doing a bit of a targeted, smaller campaign compared to like Reform. So, you know, that's that. 8 seats for Labor now. All but one are holds. They've held South Shields. They've held, a couple things. Scottish Labour is apparently feeling confident. We mentioned the SNP going down before. Cramlington, Killingsworth, as you mentioned, that's also been held by Labour since we're off. Next hour is when we're going to get a lot of results, hopefully. Apparently, I'm just hearing we've got another seat called. Yep, we've got a 9th called. The BBC hasn't put that up yet. There is definitely a 9th called. And it is going to take an educated guess and say it's in that same area.
Yep, up near Newcastle, I'm going to guess.
South Sea. Maybe it's not. Oh, no, Swindon, no.
The seat of Cramlington and Killingworth, that is actually a Labour, not exactly a gain from Conservatives on new boundaries. Labour had a plurality, but incumbent Conservative MP Ian Levy has been defeated by Labour. Labour 49% up 5, Reform 21%, Conservatives 19% down 21, which
So
is
the incumbent's
horrible
in third, in other words.
for an incumbent.
Yeah,
Greens
that
5.
is a
Liberal
really,
Democrat
really
4.
poor result. Probably not the worst we're going to see all night for them, but that is, that would be, that's the first result of the night where the incumbent is in third.
Mm.
An SNP source has told the Times Scotland that the party is monumentally, I'm not going to swear on air again, effed in Lancashire.
Lanarkshire.
Thank you.
The
party's
actually,
screwed all
BBC,
over, though, it seems.
BBC actually reporting that maybe the SNP won't do as bad as the exit poll projects. Definitely on the downturn, but apparently 10 seats is much lower than is expected for the SNP. Maybe looking at 15 or 20. I think that's a more
I was
reasonable
thinking
expectation.
30 or something like that. How many did they have at the last election? 60?
50.
50.
Or so.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was thinking
Any day now, they're all going to come in. Any day now. Any day now.
oh, maybe in another lifetime. Again on Islington North, a senior Labor source, I love that phrase, tells the BBC that Jeremy Corbyn's won that seat. Yet obviously there's not been an official call. Although, did you mention we should be getting that in next hour or the hour after?
Islington North?
Yeah.
I don't. No.
Seems
I
like
think
mid-
we'll at midday, maybe 2 p.m.
Oh, don't do this. I can't. Oh, I hope people are still watching, by the way. Anyway, we will be here for it. We all need to watch for the former leader of the UK Labour Party.
It does look like
I agree, Drew Pavlu, who's in the live chat. Stop the count.
It does look like there's been some exit poll changes on the exit poll we've been using. Conservatives apparently down to 118, Liberals up to 67. That would be the best ever result for the Liberal Democrats in history. SNP at 17, which is much more positive than before. Other 7, presumably that's Plaid 4, Greens 2, and probably 1 for Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North. Of course, Labour at 423 seats definitely clears the majority line.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, some people might have already seen this before. No, everyone will enjoy it again. Our international correspondent, Austin Pollock, has been in London and has been previewing the race. And he's got a bit more for us.
The United Kingdom, home to 68 million people. Tonight, the spotlight is on who will lead them for up to the next 5 years. A lot has changed since the last election in 2019, including a few different prime ministers. Election night 2019, Boris Johnson takes over from Theresa May, and it certainly was the results that the Conservatives would be happy with, picking up 365 seats, Johnson leading the charge for Brexit.
To get Brexit done.
This was their highest number and proportion since 1987. All seemed pretty good for the Conservatives, but it was just a few short months until things started to change.
I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. It did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules.
As the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
Johnson was forced to resign after the Partygate scandal, where he threw the party at number 10 in the middle of harsh COVID-19 restrictions, before misleading Parliament, leading to the downfall of the man who carried the Conservatives to their best results in about 30 years. So then after Boris Johnson, Liz Truss took office, the last Prime Minister to be sworn in by Queen Elizabeth II. In case you have forgotten her name, well, you're probably not alone. You didn't know her for very long. She is the shortest serving Prime Minister in the United Kingdom's history. The polling didn't go too well and was forced out as economic turmoil from new changes she introduced gripped the entire country. So now we arrive at Rishi Sunak. He became Prime Minister late in 2022, the first Prime Minister to be sworn in by King Charles. He was the UK's third Prime Minister in just 2 months back in 2022. He took office with a rather agitated public, especially after the Liz Truss drama, meaning he had to do everything he could to get the public back on his side. And since that saga, the polls have shown a steady decline in support for the Tories since the 2019 election. On the 22nd of May this year, Sunak decided to call a general election. And let's just say the announcement didn't quite go as planned.
Rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy.
As campaigning kicked off, it wasn't long before the first major stuff-up had taken place. Sunak was forced to apologise for his decision to leave the D-Day commemorations early in order to attend a political interview with ITV News.
It all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was.
So apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure.
Then during that interview, when asked about his childhood and things he had to go without, he used Sky TV as an example of him being in touch with the common man. Perhaps not the best start to Sunak's campaign.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example?
All sorts of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. Okay. So that was something that we never had growing up.
And the latest polling shows very grim chances for Rishi Sunak at the lowest level since Liz Truss. So whatever way you put it, tonight is not going to be easy for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives up against Labour and Keir Starmer. And then there's of course Nigel Farage.
Guess who's back? Back again.
But the polls don't matter anymore. Tonight it's up to the people of the United Kingdom. So grab out your scones with jam and cream and fetch a cup of tea, because it's now time for the United Kingdom decides. The numbers are coming in and you're watching it all live right here on 6 News.
With us here on 6 News, we've got some breaking news. In the first non-Labor victory of the night is recorded in the United Kingdom. Maggie Perry, where is it? Who is it?
In the heart of Yorkshire, we have in Harrogate and Knaresborough, a Lib Dem gain from the Conservatives, Andrew Jones, who has lost 22% of a vote share. Lib Dems up 10 for 46% to the Conservatives 30. Reform UK at 11, Labour 8, Greens 3%. Of course, Conservative loss. This was pretty expected, but also the first non-Labour seat of the night, and also the first one in Yorkshire, which we should be seeing a lot more from soon.
Right, gotcha. Look, that's particularly interesting, and I think we're gonna, I guess, see more results come in. Next hour is going to be huge, right? And that's going to be really big for us. Where do we think Conservatives are going to have any wins? Like, are we talking they've got to have like plus 30% margin for even a chance at this point? Because I mean, that's what some of the polls have been suggesting.
It looks like if they gain any seats, it'll be in Scotland, but very few, of course, not from Labour. Probably the seats they'll hold will be in areas in especially the south, southeast, southwest, especially the southwest, where rather the Lib Dems are the main competitors rather than Labour, and in the eastern parts of England where the Greens and Reform UK have begun to spring up, steal a lot of votes from the Conservatives. All in all, it looks like the remaining Conservative seats will probably be pretty split up in the south, and they'll be left with almost nothing in the northern part of England, possibly just around 2 seats, one of them being Rishi Sunak's seat of Richmond and North Allerton.
Right, absolutely, and that's going to be really interesting to see where that follows. I mean, Sunak's seat was only 10%-ish, right? Like, I think I just lost. There we go. I just lost battery on the other thing. Give me a second, guys. I presume the mic's still clear. No, we should be back. Yeah, Rishi Sunak. I mean, realistically, that's a seat they could lose, right? But it's about vote splitting. Sorry, but I hate these things. Did Roman just come up on here? Anyway, what I was saying, blah blah blah, something, vote splitting. Yeah, I mean, Sunak, yeah. Sorry, you know, Maggie, please.
Yeah, I mean, Labour only got 16% of the seat. The Lib Dems only got 12%. I think tactical voting could be pretty split between them. Of course, there's also satirical candidates of Nico Omalana, the monster raving loony party, Count Binface. We know him, we love him.
Oh, classics.
Yeah, but actually, those satirical candidates might actually stop Labour or the Lib Dems from gaining the seat from Rishi Sunak, who is
they're always
likely
in
to
these
hold on.
high-profile seats. But I mean, a lot of the time, it doesn't matter, right? Because you'd expect the Prime Minister to be in a safe seat, right? Surely he couldn't lose. Rishi Sunak can't lose his seat from here, etc., etc., etc. So
another seat calls for Labour. I believe this will end up being a gain to. It is in Jarrah and Gateshead East. No, Stroud. That is a gain from the Conservatives. Conservatives down 20%.
Gotcha. Yeah, right. All right. So that's another race we're following. And look, I think there's a couple here where it is becoming apparent that, I guess, I don't know, the vibe feels like they're going to get double-digit seats, not triple, right? Call it a vibe thing. I just think that exit poll is overdoing it for them. And again, maybe I'm crazy, but I think that'll be interesting. Hey, Nigel Farage has, of course, been a big factor. Let's listen back to what he had to say in the last few days of campaigning, and I'm sure there will be absolutely no music playing. I trust our producer, Rome.
Indeed, so much so that this week, on of all days, the 23rd of June, the 8th anniversary of Brexit, my first grandson was born as well. So life has been pretty good. Life has been content. I've not needed to work much on Saturdays and Sundays. I've not been subject to endless media attacks. We might come back to that, funnily enough. And I've earned more money than I've earned for 30 years, and life has been great. And suddenly Rishi calls a general election. At very short notice, I thought, well, it's impossible. I can't possibly come back with just 4 weeks to go. But I began to realise, as I travelled around the country, that I simply could not stand aside when the choice, or lack of choice, is between slippery Sunak, the biggest spinner since Blair, who's trying to convince us in what is now the 5th consecutive Conservative manifesto that somehow they're a party of low tax, when they put the tax burden up to the highest it's been since 1948, to convince us that they're a party of low immigration levels, and they got an 80-seat majority in 2019 on the back of that, and remember, with considerable support from the Brexit Party as well. We helped them enormously. But I couldn't stand aside and be lied to for the 5th manifesto in a row, when under Rishi Sunak's premiership, we've let in 2.5 million people in the last 2 years alone. Think about it. 1 in 30 people in this country has come in since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. And I couldn't stand aside and see a Labour leader. When I say leader, I don't believe the man has any leadership qualities whatsoever. None. And I think to lead a country